Welcome back to the Demystify Sci podcast. I'm Anastasia,
I'm Shiloh.
and today we are talking about AI impacts with the co-founder of AIimpacts.org, Katja Grace. And we have been kind of tangentially interested in this topic because we all live in a world that is becoming increasingly governed by algorithms, machine learning, and intelligent programs. And it seems like it's kind of all happening in the background, and there's a group of people that are very, very, very genuinely worried about what all of this artificial intelligence is going to do to the world. The vast majority of people seem to be fully comfortable with just kind of pressing on the accelerator and producing more and more and more of these machines. And, Shiloh has asked the question before on the program of why are we doing this? What is the motivating factor that induces us to just attempt to create smarter and smarter machines? And so that's one question that we wanted answered. Another question that we wanted answered was
Not just smarter machines, by the way, but intelligent ones. Like, why are we trying to engineer a god that's superior to us? That seems like a bad situation. And why are we rushing full force towards it?
yes. And so that on its face appears to be unwise, but we wanted to talk to somebody who had spent all of their time thinking about this question, who could present the degree of unwisdom that was at play. And so Katya is really interesting because she spent a lot of time thinking about this and has a relatively measured perspective. For somebody who has a relatively high sensitivity to the potential doom that these machines cause, she's very positive and generally doesn't seem like she's being heavily weighed down by the fact that she thinks that artificial intelligence, with high likelihood, is going to cause a significant shift to human life in a way that is overwhelmingly negative. Whether that's exactly extinction is up for debate, but it seems from everything that she's read and seen and heard and watched that we are creating machines that we don't understand that are going to be able to cause tremendous harm to us. And our conversation has a lot to do with her convincing us that this is the case, because we both come in as skeptics of the idea that AI can cause a human extinction level event or even something even approaching it. And I think we leave the conversation not necessarily convinced, but open to the idea that something is happening that is probably worth thinking about a little bit more than we have to this point.
Well, to that end, as you listen to this conversation, it would be great if you know of people who can speak publicly about the negative impacts or the negative affectations that they've experienced with AI systems, because I would love to be convinced that these things are scary, but mostly I've just experienced their idiocy. And I know I'm missing something, and I would like to see more direct evidence of that in the future. But we explore all that in the conversation, and we really try to unpack what separates a machine being from an actual biological being, and if there are parallel ways of approaching each one of those systems that will allow us to really discern whether those motivational structures that we're terrified of are even possible in these systems. So, beyond that, I think that this is a really important conversation, and we should be doing more of these conversations because we have more questions than answers at this point. Although I think it was a really valuable conversation for setting up those questions. Otherwise, guys, remember, this program is entirely paid for by you guys, listeners, in particular our patrons. So huge shout out to our patrons. Remember, we don't have ads. We don't sell you stuff. We're not pushing any pills or tchotchkes. We're just supported by listeners. And we couldn't be more grateful for the possibility of running an operation like this, where we put in a tremendous amount of time into getting ready for these interviews and putting them together and getting them out to you twice a week. And it's all possible because people think it's important and they put down a couple of dollars a month. So if you think you could spare a couple of dollars a month, check out patreon.com/demystifysci. It's really cool. Once you join up for any amount of money, honestly, you can give a dump truck full of money if you have it. But for any amount of money, you can come join our community, meet us face to face once a week, and we'll chop it up about all the things that are important in the world that you'd like to see explored in this kind of a fashion.
And if you are not into Patreon, we have PayPal. I think we have a bunch of cryptocurrency donation links that I don't think that anyone has ever taken advantage of. But if you have a bunch of crypto, feel free. We sell t-shirts down below on the shelf. We sell them at cost. I think we make 50 cents a pop on the t-shirts. But if you wear one, it helps with the ultimate goal, which is promoting the podcast. We are algorithmically untenable for a variety of reasons, and so do not get massively promoted on these platforms. And so anytime that you can tell somebody about the podcast, anytime that you leave a comment, you like, you subscribe, you interact with us on Twitter, Facebook, Discord, YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Instagram, all of these places where we are just spewing our ideas out into the world, you help us. And so if you don't have any cash and you don't want to buy a t-shirt and you are just a citizen of the internet, come interact with us wherever you can find us, and we will greatly, greatly appreciate it because it helps us a lot.
Yeah, by the way, if you don't have any cash, you can support us very directly by just subscribing to the YouTube channel. Even if you're listening to this on Spotify, go over to YouTube and subscribe. It helps us a lot, helps us get bigger and better guests, which is really important to furthering the quality of these conversations. You can give us a rating on the podcast platforms. There's a lot you can do. And like Nastia said, just share it with somebody who you think would enjoy it and bring more minds into this fold. If you have ideas for guests, come on over to Discord and make sure to tag one of us or Matthew so that we see your suggestion. And we'll put them on the list of things to investigate.
And once Sober October is done, I will be back on Twitter, so you can tag me on Twitter, but not for another month.
All right, guys. I think you're going to love this conversation. Tell us what you think in the comments, and we'll see you next time.
Enjoy.
The scientific revolution starts now.
Let us see in the dark. And we use AI all the time. Like we use ChatGPT, we use Claude, we use Midjourney. We're interested in all these tools for sure, but there seems to be a lot of fear about where it's all headed. And I'm honestly have had a hard time sympathizing with a lot of that fear because I find these machines to be pretty dumb. Like I just don't I don't sense any spookiness in them that leads me to think that they're really concerned with what's happening in the human world, or that they have any malevolent intentions or anything like that. Mostly I'm just struck by how not different it is from just a Google search for the most part.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to understand why people are afraid. And, we can talk about whether they should or shouldn't be, but all of this is just super fascinating. So
that relates pretty closely to that, to my answer to your earlier question of like, what am I working on or thinking about? Where I've been trying to like write up arguments for thinking you should be concerned, because I guess it just seems kind of wild to me, the situation where a bunch of people are kind of like, this is terrible, it's going to destroy the world, and I think we don't, to my knowledge, have just like a great write-up of why think that, or like I think we haven't communicated very well with the world why that would be. Like often, I guess another project that I've had in the past and I'm thinking about doing again is like running this big survey of AI researchers and what they think about stuff. And the last two times I've run it, they like the median answer to how likely is the future to be very bad as a result of AI or to have human extinction or whatever is like 5%, which feels pretty high for, I don't know, people working on this who are presumably excited about it or something. Like, yeah, 5% it will destroy the world or something. And I think often people sort of point to those surveys as like reason to be concerned, like, well, the experts think that it's very dangerous. And like I think that's part of why people like me running this survey, because it's like a thing you can point to that's very legible. But I think, I don't know, that's not a great, I don't know, way to have
Well,
this.
experts say so is rarely a satisfying reason to
Right.
Yeah, can we take a look at a play-by-play plan for how things could go wrong? Something like that? Like, what is the steps that lead to the nightmare that this 5% is concerned about?
And to piggyback on that question, is the 5% concerned about the same scenario?
Mm-hmm.
I think they're not. I think there are like at least two different clusters of things. Where I think one of them, which is like more easily understandable, is something like, uh, you know, AI will sort of speed up technological progress in general, and like make uh, new technologies more easily findable, and also it will be more accessible to more people. So, like, at the moment, if you wanted to run some, like, if you want to build bioweapons or something, it's like you need like enough support from other people around you, or like not being dobbed in by people who observe you, and like enough equipment and so on, that it's like hard for anyone to do anything really destructive as like a small group of people. But if like quite powerful thinking technology is available to just everyone, then it sort of uh, potentially makes it easier for like small groups to do
The basement
huge.
bombers of the world will be empowered.
Right, and like if you know that the world contains like some people who would like to destroy the world, but they're not really powerful enough. There's a question of like, if we just add a whole, like if we give everyone in the world access to a bunch more thinking that they can use for anything, does that change the offense versus defense balance? Like at the moment, everyone else can prevent the people who would like to kill everyone. Uh, but would it be different in this case? I think I'm less concerned about those kinds of things, but I think they're the ones that sound like more like business as usual. Like I guess like Nick Bostrom has written about, I forgot what he calls it exactly. I think it's like a vulnerable world scenario where he's like, well, we keep on sort of pulling technologies out of the ether, and you don't know what each one will be like. But maybe you get a technology one day that is like nuclear weapons that you can make in a microwave or something, like that you don't need anything special for. We don't really have any reason to believe that like a technology that was that dangerous can't be discovered. So in some sense, every time we sort of just keep on pressing forward with technology, we're running a risk of bumping into something like that, which I think is just like a general concern with technology. And you could sort of be like, I don't know, why be concerned about AI in particular? Um, yeah, but
It certainly
Like
leads to higher efficiency.
But it could also just be the food additives that eventually just destroy the ability of the population to reproduce as much as it could be a nuclear bomb that you could make in your microwave, right? Like or plastics that end up in every single body on Earth, or PFAS, or any of these things that you invent a technology, and sometimes they're very flashy and they're very obviously dangerous, where you're like, ooh, nuclear annihilation, that's very sexy.
yeah,
But the reality is that as you continue to produce technology, you're highly likely at some point to make something that will kill you and everyone else.
And it seems reasonable that the AI would accelerate these processes, right? I mean, in my own
right.
life, it certainly has made it's made it faster for me to accomplish my tasks for
I've
the
become
most
much
part.
more dangerous since AI
Yeah.
arrived.
Yeah, watch out.
Well, no,
No,
I was thinking about in the 1970s, there was a lot of domestic terrorism. There was a lot of people blowing up bombs,
Yeah,
and I think that there were easily accessible books for how to build bombs. Like
yeah,
you could
right.
just go to the bookstore and buy a book about how to build bombs, and I think that
like the anarchist cookbook.
yeah, and I think that you can point to a lot of different things that decreased the frequency of domestic terrorism, but I think that at its baseline, making sure that it's harder to get a book that's like, this is how you build a fertilizer bomb is probably high on that list. Because
Yeah,
then at the very least you have like impotent rage. Like you're still angry, but it's harder to build the
I
bomb.
mean, do you have any sense of whether the people in the defense sector are scrambling to get ahead of these kind of eventualities?
I actually don't know what they're thinking about. Yeah, um, I guess
I
they might like. Go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Um, I think it's also worth thinking about how, like, AI can potentially make these things better. Like,
Mm.
if you're worried about like people building bombs, and if you sort of like looked at everything they bought on the internet, maybe you could notice if someone was trying to build a bomb. Having AI means that you can sort of have intelligent thought directed at heaps of things that otherwise we wouldn't be able to afford to have someone like looking over. Um, if you want that, I mean, that also is very kind of surveillance-y, which has downsides.
Yeah, I was gonna say I just ran into this guy at a bar like a month ago who was a contract. He did something in project management at the Defense Department, and he seems to indicate that a huge amount of the resources were trying to get ahead of what other states were doing with these same technologies,
Oh,
right? And so
interesting.
it's kind of this what do you just this escalating situation where people are always trying to come up with a new technology ahead of the one that everybody else is using, and there's a lot of I guess east-west tension going on with a lot of these new AIs. But I don't know if you can
Yeah.
trust people who work at the Defense Department, so I have no idea. But it was interesting. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
But so this is just one dangerous scenario, right? So you
Yeah.
suddenly have this massive intelligence that is able to tell you how to build a bomb, a bioweapon, whatever else. And so the people that know a lot about AI are worried about it. What's the other one?
Yeah, the other one is more that we'll make new agents, I guess, like something that's like humans in that it wants things in the world and really goes out of its way to get them and is like, much smarter than us and very aware of what's going on. Uh, and the things that it wants are not sort of well aligned with what we want. Um, so
So
I guess
demons, like summoning demons.
yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I've been trying to think of like I don't know a good I don't know short name for this kind of thing that's evocative. But yeah,
I mean, what was the Sagan book? A Demon Haunted World?
I haven't read that.
I haven't read it either, but I think that the idea is that there's all these. He was using demon in the sense of like inexplicable paradoxes in science,
yeah,
but the idea that there is a force that can be awakened that is contrary to the aims of humans and mysterious and able to enlist humans in manifesting itself does sound, in the most classical sense, very demonic.
I mean, at the heart of that one for me is that I feel like the people I've talked to working in the AI community are really excited about the end game of achieving artificial general intelligence.
right.
But I don't totally know why. Like, I don't know why you would want to make a being that would then have all of these rights. And essentially, you've just reinvented the serf class, except they're hyper intelligent. And now it just seems like a very bizarre thing to rush towards without having a good reason for why you want that to be the case.
Yeah, why do people want to do this?
Yeah, yeah. I think well, the people who want to rush toward it right. A bunch of the ones I ever interact with, I'm seeing on Twitter, and I think they might just be trolling. It's a bit hard to know, or like I don't know, they're just sort of in favor of speed, or kind of I don't know. It's like seems more masculine or something.
Because there's this group, the like effective accelerationists, is what
Yeah,
they call
those kind of people.
themselves.
I don't
Because
actually know what's up with them.
Kurzweil's in this camp too, from what I can tell.
I think that might be right. Yeah, or that. Yeah, I recently heard him say something like, I don't know, like if you don't want to build AI, you just don't like intelligence or something, or like,
Okay.
or the people who want to do this more slowly, if they, as soon as they see a real medical breakthrough, they'll change their minds. Um, so yeah, I think there's. My guess is that a lot of it is like, well, um, if you didn't think that there were actually risks, I think often they probably don't think they're actually risks, and at least being like, I don't know, what we have is great. If we had more stuff like that, it would be great. If we like solved some diseases, that would be great. And I guess AGI is a particular vision of, or I guess a broad set of visions of it being like really quite a lot of intelligence, and like anything that humans were previously doing. There's kind of no reason for them to put work into because there are smarter entities available on demand to do the stuff.
Yeah, I've heard Kurzweil. His plan is something like, "Well, we'll figure it out when we get there," kind of thing. Like, they'll be so smart, but we'll know what to do, or we'll know how to coach them at that point in time. Which, like I said at the beginning of this, I'm not totally seeing the danger, but
Yeah.
if I did see the danger, I think that would be very unreassuring to me. That we'll figure it out when we get there.
Yeah, I guess I feel like a lot of responses like that are just very kind of hand wavy, as if like not very much is at stake. Like I think I don't know, that would make sense if the stakes were much lower. Um, but yeah,
Well,
should
I
we talk
mean,
more about like why I think there is a risk?
yeah, yes, because I mean, I think that okay, so there's two camps that you've described. The camp
Mm,
of we can build super functional terrorists, or we can build what amounts to a demon that seeks to destroy life as we know it because its goals are in opposition to us. And I think that
yeah,
the obvious counter to that is to say, well, if people are really motivated to build a bioweapon, they can already do it. And for the second one is to say, well, these machines seem to be really dumb. And so it's highly unlikely that you could program into it this independent will that was completely uh,
Unaligned,
uncontrollable,
right?
unaligned and uncontrollable. And so you, as somebody who studies this, I'm sure that you've heard both of these rebuttals. And so maybe, yeah, you could lay out why you think that there is risk.
yeah. What if we start with the second category? It's like well, they're really dumb, but they have been getting better super fast. Like I don't even remember like GPT-2, um, or when you started using this, but like uh, not very many years ago, it was sort of incoherent-ish, or like it would say things that were somewhat coherent, and we'd be like, "Oh wow, this is amazing," and like within a few years, like I guess I don't know the exact results, but it's like pretty much like talking to a smart human on lots of topics, um, and so I think there's a question of like exactly how fast it becomes very smart, and I think maybe separately there's a concern that it's very soon, like maybe GPT-5 or something is um like just smarter than humans at anything or something, or like any kind of discussion. I don't really know, um, or like that's not like my well thought out guess or something. But I think we only have a hazy sense of like as you add more compute to the pile of compute, um, that are being used to build these systems, how much smarter does it get? I think uh, intuitively it seems like it's quite a lot, quite fast. Um, and so, but I think there's a separate question of like, okay, you can sort of be more or less intelligent, and then there's this question of can you have a sort of independent will, and just go about doing things on your own. And I think there's somewhat different. Like maybe it's hard to make a thing that effectively has an independent will if it's too stupid because it just like quickly runs into problems, and then I don't know. We don't think of it as having an independent will if it just bumps into a wall and then stops or something, or like just gets confused and turns off. But I think like there's a lot of like once you had something that was quite smart but not very, I guess I would say agenty, but yeah, kind of not very much like a human. Like you can have a thing that's just kind of like you ask it questions and it answers, and it's not like trying to do anything in the world.
Like
But
the equivalent of a
uh,
hammer, but it just happens to be able to talk to you and answer questions.
yeah, like in I guess like among people I know, it's often referred to as like agents versus tools. And so like the things we have at the moment are much more like tools. Um, I don't know. I also think of it as similar to like Google Maps or something. Like you just you give it an input and it gives you an output. It's never like, ooh, I'll try and like make sure that you go past this place so that you might buy a thing or something. It's just like, uh,
Unless
yeah,
you're playing Pokemon Go, as it turns out.
yeah. Right. I haven't tried that. Um, but a lot of people are trying to make things that are like agents, like, and I think it's it seems likely to me that once you have the very smart thing, it's not that hard to turn it into a thing that's more like an agent, because you can. I think the kind of thing people do is like write prompts that um, it can sort of loop through that will make it behave like an agent. Like if you, um, like suppose you want it to buy you some shoes or something. You're like, all right, the goal is like to buy me some shoes. So now first think of like what's a list of like instructions for buying some shoes. What would you do? All right. Once you've written the list of instructions, can you do the first one? Okay. Can you do the second one or something? Like you can, like maybe at its deepest level, it's not really very agenty, but you've sort of like built one jankily out of the thing. Uh, I don't know that much about technical AI, to be clear. Like I don't build these things, so I don't know the details about like the more agenty types. Like I think people actually just build more intrinsically agenty type things. But my point is just like if you have a very smart tool, I think it's not that hard probably to turn it into an agent. Like it doesn't require a lot more. Um,
Well, it sounds like you're
you know,
saying it'll taste like an agent, smell like an agent, but it's still a tool underneath all of that, which is kind of my experience with the advancement of these things. It's like it feels more real, but there's still that uncanny valley. It's like even when I see really good computer animation, actually, even the better the computer animation gets in movies, it looks more fake to me, I feel like. At least, or maybe not more fake, it's not the right way to put it, but it still looks fake. I'm just like,
yeah.
it's not it's not the same. Even if you use claymation or something, there's something about the way the light interacts. It's somehow more believable to me.
Like my buddy works on doing training for large corporations, and
Mm.
6 months ago to a year ago, he would have to he'd have to write all the scripts, record all the parts, and then put them together into these presentations where he was on camera talking. And he found a program that allows him to create an avatar and write the script and synthesize the voice. And so now it's not him in the presentations talking, it's now this avatar. And it is frightening. It is like so, it looks equivalent to the way the chimps talked in the Planet of the Apes, you know, where there's this like
Right.
massively exaggerated mouth movements.
Yeah.
It's exactly right. And so you're watching it and it's believable to about here, and then
Mm.
the mouth is just it's just a horror show.
I mean, we
And
could talk about like I don't know, will we cross the uncanny valley and come out of the other side? I tend to think yes, but I think
Hmm.
more interestingly, perhaps, I think for some of these things, it doesn't really matter if it's believable or if it uh, deep inside isn't a real agent. Um, like it matters how it behaves. And I think an interesting thing to compare to is like corporations at the moment. Like those are kind of agents that we made, and like we set them up with a goal that like you need to make profits, um, and they do pretty much do that,
Really well.
or like they, yeah. And you might think like, oh, they won't like do anything crazy, like they're made of humans, like maybe we can turn them off or something. But it's like, who's we? Like if you don't like how McDonald's behaves or something, like you can't turn it off. It's it's not clear that like anyone can, and it's like going out around in the world like trying to make sure that you don't. And so I think it's like you could make systems that are like that, but like every part of them is not human, uh, and they're like aggressively trying to win something in the world, and their expertise is like superhuman loyal level, and like they're very good at advertising and they're very good at like all of the things that you know
Manipulating governments.
yeah, for instance, uh like I guess
and this seems like a very realistic
Oh
risk,
my God.
right? Because you have these I think the corporation example is one that I was thinking about a lot when we were first talking about how to train AIs to be moral. Because I reached out to you like almost more than a year ago when I came across your
right.
survey. Actually, it was
Yeah, right.
the you had polled all of these different people for their probability of doom from AI, and it was a very
Yeah.
neat chart. I came across it on Twitter, and I was like, oh, I want to talk to this person. And at the time, there was a lot of talk about how do we train these machines to be moral, and I was like, this feels like the same conversation that we're having about corporations and trying to train corporations to be moral. And we have clearly failed utterly at that because
Well, it's kind of a pick-up sticks game, right? Like they have to do something horrible, which then people have to spend millions of dollars in resources proving out in court. And of course, corporations are way more rich. Let's say they can hire more lawyers, and this is playing out with Google right now, but it's been playing out for a long time. And so it's very difficult to chase around these abuses. And eventually, I mean, I wouldn't say it's hopeless because we do restrain corporate malfeasance and pollution and these things, but it takes time and then there's a lag period.
okay, so that's excellent. So basically, my horror show of a future is where you said something really key about the fact that corporations can't be stopped because they're kind of non-human already.
Mm-hmm.
There is and we've talked about this before too, me and Shiloh, where there's a directive, which is profit, and so you have
Yeah.
all of these people that are inside the corporation that are playing roles but they're not really agents. Like the corporation itself is the agent, and they have to pull some lever inside of this larger agent that they participate in order to
Yeah.
help the agent achieve the goal
There's
of
no one
profits.
to blame, really.
Yeah, like you can fire the CEO or whatever, but you can't, like, the CEO's not really in charge. Like, he's got the board of directors has the shareholders have whatever other obligations they have. And so my worst case scenario is that corporations basically get taken over by intelligent algorithms where there really isn't someone. Like, we're already seeing it
It's kind of already happening.
right? Like, you try to call the customer service department of Google. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that doesn't exist. Like, there's no one to call. Even the
Yeah.
airlines, basically all large corporations, we're already getting to the point where there is just this facade, this giant wall that you come up against where you knock on it and you're like, I don't know that there's anybody home. Like, I don't know. Like, it's clearly there, but what's inside of it? And
Yeah.
so if AIs are now in control of corporations, then it's this smooth ramp to them being programmed with the desire of the corporations and us having absolutely no real lever to do anything about the fact that they're incredibly effective at fulfilling the job description of the corporation.
Yeah. I think in the case with humans or with AIs in corporations, you might hope that they're still like answerable to humans eventually if the humans were to like stop buying their thing or something. Like at some level you still have like some sort of power. Or like maybe you can vote and actually cause someone who will like rein in whatever they're doing. Like there are like nominal ways that you can uh that you have and that humans have power that AIs don't have. Um, but I think in a future where like humans are essentially completely useless, um, I think you could lose those powers as well. Because like I don't know, like if you don't actually have income, like we might fix this by having like a UBI or something. But if like everyone is sort of unemployable, um, and also is like just like less good at political maneuvering than like than the opposition to them. Like if the companies can just always outwit you, or like any kind of non-human agents that are trying to cause things in the world just always have the advantage at every sort of strategic interaction, then I feel like even if you start out with nominally like political power and like um, economic power, you could sort of those could get whittled away until like you just sort of don't have any leverage. Uh,
I mean, that seems like it's kind of happened already. It's always been very bizarre to me that these corporations have personhood, but they can't be punished like people. Like, you can't put a corporation in jail, which seems really unfair. It seems like an easy fix, though, to me, honestly.
just put the whole
Well,
corporation.
yeah, just put it on pause. Like, bump, like you're done for 10 years or whatever it is. Um,
Yeah,
I think that would cut back on a lot of these problems that we see.
We can file this solution into the bin with Warren Moser's solution to the oil crisis of mandatory 30-mile-per-hour speed limits and Terrence
Global.
Howard's reparations plan to make sure that descendants of slaves never pay taxes again. things that would solve the problem but are unlikely to ever happen.
But no, it seems like that's already a central crisis for democracies and democratic republics, as far as I can tell. One thing I wanted to ask you before we got too deep into this is
Yeah.
what is intelligence and what is smarts?
Mm.
Yeah. And I feel like it can be a pretty complicated and tricky question. Maybe like the important thing for being worried about it is something like um ability to figure out how to behave effectively to get what you want or something.
Mm,
Like
very Machiavellian.
I mean, I might care about other things, like I don't know, like if I have a conversation companion, um, like maybe I enjoy their creativity and I don't know, particular ways of seeing the world and so on, I would consider that intelligence. But if I'm playing chess against someone, like the thing I care about is like how much are they just always going to beat me? Um, and I guess the thing I'm worried about is that we make uh, machines that can always beat me against everything in life, not just chess.
That's interesting because it seems like the solution set. I know you guys are making fun of me for my solution set, but I feel like it's the same solution set with dealing with corporate non-human entities. It's like, how do we actually, this is the problem of our times, as far as I can tell, is how do we actually control non-human entities? If we could figure it out for, I mean, that's great. Let's figure it out for AGI because then we'll figure it out for corporations too. And it seems like the world would be a lot less frightening place at that point.
Yeah. I guess the thing that like people I know talk about is sort of um like imagine that some monkeys had had a human and they're like, all right, we'll keep them trapped and we'll punish them if they do anything wrong or something. You sort of expect the human to just like pretty quickly find some way out of this situation. Um, I don't know, maybe not with sufficiently big monkeys. Like, it's gonna beat you up. But like, if the monkey's like, yeah, we'll be clever. We'll like keep them trapped in this place, and we'll like watch what they're doing and punish them if they do the wrong thing. Like the human is probably clever enough to be able to trick the monkeys. And so I think there's a sort of layer of difficulty with punishing entities that are like much cleverer than you and able to see what you're doing as well. Um, that I don't know, makes it seem harder to punish. I guess like harder to punish both AI and large corporations that are also smarter than a human in many ways.
Well, you can't punish them with money. I mean, particularly in the case of the computers, they probably don't care too much about money. And corporations just
I mean,
treat it as the cost of doing business. So I agree. So you need some other sort of punishment. The question, I mean, I really worry that even if we could come up with a solution, I know you guys don't like mine. I still
I
like
don't
it.
think it's a bad solution. I
But
just
even if
think
we
that
could come
it's
up with it, implementing it, especially in a situation where the corporations have what I perceive as vastly more influence than the individual inside of the society on the actual operations of the regulating committees. It's like,
mm,
what chance do you have of implementing anything? It just, this kind of stuff makes me feel super, super doomy. Yeah, I don't know how to fix that, and it causes me a lot of anxiety.
like how to fix the situation with corporations.
Yeah, but I think the
Yeah.
same strategies would apply to AGI, um, which makes me glad that people are talking about it because I think it's transferable. But I don't see anybody talking about a solution set for that, although everybody seems to be really anxious about it.
because like all of our moral systems to this day have been about human to human relations. They've been
Mm,
like, don't rob, kill, steal, covet, whatever. And this all has to do about very human relationships because you suffer reputational damage when you do these things and your tribe will kick you out and you won't survive if your tribe kicks you out. Like very simple, very straightforward. And we don't have a 5,000-year-old code of morals for how non-human agents should interact with humans or how non-human
Yeah.
agents should interact with the environment. It's like it's not.
It's not in the Constitution. It's not in any of the moral codes. It's just a complete blind spot.
Is it because they just okay? So I think that corporations as a model for for advanced general, is it artificial general intelligence or advanced general intelligence?
Artificial general intelligence.
Okay, so I think that corporations as a narrow spectrum model for artificial general intelligence, I think that they're like artificial profit intelligence, maybe? Like if I was to like loosely categorize them.
Not very artificial, but yeah.
Well, in some sense it's you're basically like it's like a superstructure of everybody who's inside of it, and so
Yeah, they're
not
like
a
the
real
paperclip maximizer for dollars and
Exactly.
stocks and all
Exactly.
this. Yeah.
We were saying like they can't just have other goals easily. Like it's not like there's some way you could write in some different goals and then they would do them. It's like, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
in theory, the government could do that, but they own the governments essentially. I mean, they certainly have a tremendous amount of influence, so that doesn't seem like the place where you can regulate them.
And it's
It's like without like a constitutional amendment or something.
yeah, I'm struck by the difficulty of even coming up with a way to regulate a corporation that whose motivation is profit for having too much profit in a way that's morally repugnant to us, because at the end of the day everybody is deeply tied into the corporation having done a good job of making profit. Like anybody who owns stocks, anybody who
401ks, retirement plans, yeah.
yeah, basically any citizen of a country is inherently tied to the corporations of their country performing well, because that means that GDP is high, standard of living is high, they get to buy their tchotchkes, they get to go to the corner and buy Starbucks and McDonald's and whatever else for relatively low prices, and life goes
I
on
don't
as
know if
it's supposed to.
it works. I feel like if they're not a shareholder in the company, then does it help them if the company does well? I guess like indirectly in some ways, but yeah,
It
I
helps them
would
in
have
the
liked
sense
that I
that,
don't
like,
necessarily
if
follow
you
up.
live in a rural area, and let's say Walmart does really
Yeah.
well, you live in a rural area, and the only place where you can shop is a local store where everything costs, 5 times the price that it would off of Amazon or something. Let's say that you only have cash, and so you can't actually shop on Amazon, and so as long as Walmart is doing well, then it can open a shop in your location, and you're thrilled because all of a sudden your cost of living goes down by 5x.
Right. Yeah, okay. Things
And
like
you
that.
don't have to go to 5 different stores in order to get all the things you want. You can just go to the supercenter and you have everything. And so it's like, it's not a direct thing of money in your pocket from the stock market, but the
Right.
profits that it's generating elsewhere, I think, do
I
translate.
think a more obvious one would just be that most of us work for corporations, and so we're interested in seeing them succeed. I think most of the people I meet on the street,
Yeah.
at some level, work for a corporation. It's just the fundamental employer of people in the world we live in.
I hadn't thought about
Right,
that.
so I think
You're right.
people want corporations to make profits. I guess I want to say like the making profits is not the problem. Like, often that is indeed good for all these reasons. The problem is that if you like only care about profits and don't care about like other things that humans care about, then you tend to like throw away those things or like burn them in some way to get the profits. And so I feel like the question is more like to the extent that people are being harmed by the corporations in some way, like, the classic one would be like they're polluting or something, then can those people, can the cost to those people somehow feed back to anyone who will act differently as a result?
Not as it stands. Do you have any ideas about how we could do that?
I guess like a line of thought I think is interesting is like I think often if people work at corporations and the corporation does something you don't like, you actually don't blame the people working at the corporation very much. Like you're like, oh well, you need to have a job, but like sure, and someone was going to do it. And I think like if people judged each other more for like their jobs, that would actually change the situation some. Or like I think I've also thought about is like, okay, maybe most people don't get judged for their jobs very much, like if their company does something bad. But like if the company does need to accept, like there's a way that you can with other humans, if they do something wrong, yeah, you can like not just send them to jail, but also just have everyone get angry with them and be like, wow, that was not cool. And you can't really do that very well with a corporation as a whole. You could do it with particular humans at the corporation, but we don't really. But it could just be someone's job at the corporation to do that. Like, in order for the corporation to run, someone needs to take moral responsibility for it. And and you need to be able to like phone them up and talk to them and be like, what is going on here, dude? This is not cool. And they need to feel guilty about it.
And they need to have a lot of power in that corporation too, right? At least as much as the profit-making section. That's the problem, is that there's a conflict of interests ultimately.
Well, they have some power in if you say the company can only run if someone's willing to take moral responsibility for it. Because like if if they have to be paid too much to take moral responsibility for it, then they will leave and do another job. And so then uh, the company does actually need them a lot. This is a pretty left field proposal to
Well, no, I love the idea.
I like
It's
it.
empowering in some
I like
sense, I
it.
think, because you're like, you know, you're right. Like there are these non-human entities, and that people are slotting into these roles and kind of working. But at the end of the day, there are human beings that are sitting in every one of those positions, and
Right.
you know, I think that there is some fraction of cop out to people saying, "Well, I can't do anything about this." You know,
Yeah.
we had a conversation with a guy who was working in the homeless shelters in San Francisco recently,
Yeah.
and he was just a friend that we made at a party when we were down there, and he essentially had this really disillusioning experience where he got into this line of work because he wanted to, of course, make a difference and help people out. But it turned out that essentially through different NGOs, the state had essentially commissioned these shelters to get people off the street at all costs, not to really help them, let them do drugs, but make sure they do it inside of these warehouses. And so they're out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
And I remember asking him, now that I think about it, where I was like, "Hey, have you tried like going to your superiors or up a little bit higher in the chain and pointing out the ineffectiveness of this approach?" And he was kind of like, "No, I just don't see the point." And
Mm.
now that you're talking about this, I'm thinking, maybe we should have pushed him harder on that, because maybe there is more, a, what would you call it, agency. Maybe
Mm.
people do have more agency than they realize in some of these cases.
Yeah. I guess I'm more. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I think a more realistic thing that I think could affect this kind of thing is like if we had a UBI, like universal basic income, and so everyone did have enough to live on, I think that would make it feel more reasonable for people to take more responsibility for the jobs they have because it's never like, oh well, you needed to feed your children or something. Like you had to have the job. Like if jobs, I think a UBI would make jobs more uh, like a free choice um, in a way that could mean that across the board people feel more responsible for what they do. And I think that would be an interesting upshot.
If there are any jobs left.
Oh yeah, sorry. I was thinking absent AI. um,
I was just thinking, first of all, that I think, yeah, people should, in this day and age, there's no reason for people to be starving or whatever. But I feel like the jobs would still, the work is going to attract people who want to get ahead. And so you might be actually selecting for people who would be more aggressively, I don't want to say, I don't know what the word would be, not materialistic, but uh, I don't know. I have some intuition that you would be selecting for people that would be more willing to make moral compromises in order to get ahead. But maybe that's
in
not
terms
true. Maybe you would just select for people
yeah.
who are inventive uh, and ingenious and productive and just creative types as
Like if
well.
you had UBI and then people still went to work.
Yeah. I mean, would you? Here's the question.
It's hard to imagine because it's like, okay, so if you have UBI, what motivates you to work?
Exactly. Like,
It
would you work because would the work that you do be like underwater basket weaving, or would it be developing a service that actually improves humanity?
Or would it be like helping them build a ray gun that is able to vaporize people from,
Yeah.
3 miles away? Like, I think that all of these
Well,
things. I have this feeling that there is, if you provide a sufficiently high standard of living for people, that most people don't need to work in order to be able to have a house and transportation and raise a family, that the people who will work will be the ones that are either workaholics or inveterate puzzle solvers or
mm,
people who love money.
Man, I realized something recently though. People never have enough. Like
Mm,
I know people who make millions of dollars a year. They're still broke,
mm,
right?
mm.
That's been perplexing to me
mm.
in the last few months. I've just it's something about that where no matter how much you earn, you always find a way to spend it and need more.
So it's like
Does
in
it make
a
sense to you to want more, but not
mm,
need more?
well, I think that at some point it's hard for people to tell apart like wants and needs. Shyla and I always joke that we
Yeah.
maintain a rich list of things that we'll buy when we get rich, and on that rich
Mhm.
list is like a new mattress, like a roof for our house. And so
Fix
I'm
the
like, do we
leaking roof.
need that or do we want that? It's like, it's hard to tell. You could just sleep on the floor on like a thin bedroll for the rest of your life. Do you really need the mattress?
Yeah.
Unclear. And so I think that it really starts to the border for these things really starts to thin. But I'm like, let's see if we can redirect a little bit back to this question, the way that
Wait,
the
one second
Yeah.
on UBI. Do you think that's going to happen? The UBI thing in our country, at least.
Hmm. I don't know much about it. I'm pretty
Okay.
uncertain. I guess it seems like a pretty reasonable way to try and resolve some of the problems from AI causing job losses, which I expect will happen eventually, but it's sort of unclear when. Uh, yeah, and there are probably other ways to improve the situation there too, and also it's unclear that we will improve the situation. Seems like I don't know. At the moment, some people are destitute. It could just be that all the humans are destitute at some point. Nothing stopping that happening.
unfortunate.
I mean, there's an argument to be made that the government can create jobs whenever it wants quite easily. Like, you can always find projects to put people to work on if you so desire. We've been having a lot of conversations with economists lately, and particularly
Mm,
the alternative MMT economists, who seem to think that the government essentially has unending pockets at the end of the day, and
mm.
therefore they can, as long as people are working, everything keeps rolling, and so you could just always keep putting people to work with whatever you can imagine.
Well, it's interesting because if AI really does get to be to the point of general intelligence where it can do all of the software jobs, it can run every single email job, it can do every single programming job. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's also an AI podcast service now where you can feed it a topic that you want to hear a podcast about, and it'll generate de novo a conversation between people about the topics that you've asked it
Cool.
to index.
I haven't
So
seen that.
podcasters are out, like Mr. Beast, you could algorithmize him,
Mm,
like you can make enough slop to paper the internet from dawn to dusk every single
yeah.
day, 10 miles deep. Like, I don't think that this is a problem. Um, at some point, the only thing that really remains is hard labor, right? Because, like, that's kind of the only thing that the AI can't do because the AI is, by its very nature, not embodied. And so maybe it
Yeah.
can control some pipetting robots in some laboratories. Maybe it can control some assembly lines and whatever else. But at some point, if you're coming down to we need to build roads, we need to build infrastructure, we need to build bridges, tunnels, whatever else, like these are the
Yeah.
jobs that remain for the people.
I think also the inspired jobs, from what I could tell, like I don't sense a lot of like actual generative creativity from these entities at this point.
It's
I've
true.
been wondering about that.
Oh, say it again?
Yeah, I've been wondering about that. Like, I feel like
Mm.
in terms of like, I don't know, real insights, I feel like I read blog posts and sometimes they're like really insightful. I'm not sure that I've read a thing from an AI where I'm like, oh, that's like an interesting insight that will change how I see the
Exactly.
world in the future or something. Um,
That's why I
but
was
I,
calling them dumb at the beginning. I mean, they're
yeah,
very good. They're like a really nice version of Google, but they
yeah.
just yeah. I wonder about that. And so I wonder, it could be a beautiful future in that case, because if they're not really capable of generating inspired insights about, how to actually improve the situation, then you can imagine that there's actually a real need for creative work. And we've been exploring this on the show a lot, but everybody from Jung to Nietzsche to Kierkegaard, these people have been pointing at the danger of people's alignment with inspired work disappearing in the modern technological age, that people aren't really using their full generative genius, in the kind of like Blakean sense of actualizing their souls. And so if that's the only work that remains to be done, that might be kind of amazing, actually.
I worry that will get done by like GPT-5 or something, though. I'll
believe it when I see it.
But,
yeah, because like, what would it need to be? I think that human insight, comes from looking at something and having this weird feeling of, I think that this fits together in a new and strange way. It's having the desire to come up with an analysis out of nowhere. Like, I think about Scott Alexander's blogs.
Yeah.
Oftentimes he writes stuff that can only come from a mixture of his experience, the social environment that he's in, and the cultural froth of topics that he's able to like skim something off the top and say something really interesting about the world on the basis of that.
Yeah.
And he's inspired a lot of people. I've noticed that blog culture in the Scott Alexander adjacent space, everybody's trying to be Scott Alexander. And so he's inspired like a sea of imitators, right? There's just this vibe of how people write their blogs where he's... And so it feels almost like everybody is acting like a little AI model of him, because he comes up with the style, everybody else tries to copy it, nobody can quite pull it off. And I'm like, I don't think that an AI, even an AI that's trained on his blog posts, would be able to generate a new blog post that was able to bring all of these different threads together in this kind of wry and off the cuff way that he manages to do it. And I think that's because the internal landscape of Scott Alexander is inaccessible to the training data. You can train off of the ideas, like the things that he puts out into the world, but you cannot train off of this weird thing that happens inside of the brain, that it's just like indexing the world and is having ideas that are, it's kind of like the creation of new elements inside the mind, almost.
I guess, you think that AI won't be able to do that?
I don't see any evidence for it, is the thing. I don't even see the spark of that sort of thing.
I think that the path to it might be through Neuralink or similar technologies. Because and a theory of consciousness. So like a lot of things have to fall into place before it becomes a realistic risk. Number one, you have to be able to actually understand where ideas come from. And I think right now we do not have we don't even have, like, we talk about, where does consciousness come from? But that is even a different question than where does an idea come from? Because the idea is a subset of the consciousness. And so we can't even begin to ask that question until we have a functional theory of consciousness. And a functional theory...
I can also imagine both of them separately.
Interesting. How?
Yeah. Well, I think you could have something that was like a thought without being conscious. Like I could imagine some sort of thing that was that was emulating successfully what happens inside Scott Alexander's head, but without being itself conscious. Or I can imagine, a person who's conscious but not having any thoughts. Like that happens often. So then, I guess I want to say that they're kind of like two separate things that do come together often. But, yeah.
So what does the system look like that is not conscious but has thoughts?
I don't know. I guess what does it look like? I'm not sure. I don't know what a machine that has thoughts looks like either. Like I don't know what the inside of a head looks like. I was saying like it's possible for me to conceive of such a thing in my ignorance. It could be that it's not actually possible, that like once we understood how consciousness works, you'd be like, no, you have to have consciousness to be having the equivalent of a thought. But
I'm
I
inclined to believe that you have to have consciousness in order to have thoughts, because, and it's interesting because the attempts at figuring out what consciousness is used to be very physical. They used to be like, we can build a physical model of this squishy gray goo in such a way where thoughts just will, we hit the start button and then thoughts start pouring out of it in whatever data equivalent we have decided is the thought space. And I think that people have gotten really despondently discouraged by that. Like, the neural correlates of consciousness is a failed project. Like, you
interesting.
can't look into the brain and be like, okay, these things knock together, and then you like have the experience of chocolate.
Yeah.
And so it's been really funny because we keep talking to consciousness researchers that are becoming functional dualists, where they're like, there's a thing. Like, I've had psychedelic experiences and I've touched something that exists out there beyond me. And I think that that's where everything comes from. And these are like very buttoned up, super dry academics that are just having their minds blown by this experience. And so I think that there's something deeply non-corporeal about the emergence of thoughts. And I know that that's not a popular view for the rationalists, because the rationalists would say that like everything is material.
Yep.
And you can like boil it down to materialism, but I'm not sure that you can. And so if you can't, then you can't have a machine that has thoughts.
Well, even worse would be that that the brain is nothing like a computer, despite everybody's attempts to linguistically identify it as a computer. I suspect that that is more the case than people realize. If you look back across time at the way that people have described the mind, they've always used the technological analogies that are available to them. And it's funny because it's gotten so tied up in the language. You know, they call them these neural networks, right? And all of these things. Like it's almost a foregone conclusion that the brain is a computer, and it could be very well so that it is nothing like a computer, actually.
But
not very much. Yeah, go ahead.
If we have Neuralink that is able to map the interior of the brain well enough to figure out what impulses and the order of impulses and the feed forward and feedback mechanisms that are necessary in order to have a thought, then I think we get one step closer to being able to model something that can actually have inspired ideas.
It's a huge if.
It's a huge if, where I'm like, I have a feeling that it is, I mean, they're doing really interesting work where they're able to take brain scans and reproduce things that you can see. So like off of, I think, like fMRI data.
Yeah,
so you look at a picture, they do an fMRI scan as you think about the picture, and then they can reconstruct some super grainy pixelated image of the picture.
Yeah, right.
That seems like kindergarten level. Like perception seems so simple compared to actually synthesizing inspired ideas about the picture.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm like, that is this like baseline. It's almost a motor function. And so I'm like, I think that Neuralink will work really well for motor functions, like the senses. But thought isn't really a sense. It's this process. And processes are always, I think, harder to model because it's abstract. It's the connection of a bunch of different things. It's like a networking process of everything that begins with the sensory inputs and ends with this drawer of things that you've stored in abstract ways that you like link together and then eventually come up with something that's inspired. And the computational difficulty of that seems like we haven't even begun to scratch the surface of it. And so GPT-5 will be smart, and it will be probably more agenty than anything else that we've seen. But I would I feel like there's a new Turing test to be established, which is like, can it write a blog post that makes you go, whoa, the way that I see the world is different?
I mean, talking about that kind of thing as like thinking, um, yeah, that seems like a good benchmark to to measure a good new Turing test. I guess I'm curious what you guys think about like at the moment the Claude or whatever seems to have like thoughts like lower quality thoughts or something, but still things that if a human had them, we would call them a thought. Like, um, I mean, I guess a lot of what it does seems, I don't know, maybe it's often used for creating things that seem kind of bullshitty, but but I feel like I don't know if I go to it with like an emotional problem and I'm like, why did this happen? Why do I feel this way? Why did this person treat me this way or something? I feel like it can give I don't know, a pretty thoughtful response where like if my friend said those things, I'd be like, oh, you thought about this, like you have some thoughts. Um, the things you were just saying about thoughts, like that it's hard to model them, or that like the training doesn't have access to them because they're in people's heads, that sort of thing. I feel like that sort of also goes for these kind of thoughts, right? Um, and yet it seems like these systems can do them. Um, or like are modeling them in some sense. Do we think those are conscious? Do we think they're not really thoughts?
Okay, so check it out. I think that in order for it to be a thought, it would have to be something that wasn't at all in the training data. So as long as it was trained on any kind of like Psychology Today blogs, any kind of like 17 magazine advice column stuff, if you had a
Yeah.
training data that had absolutely no psychological information in it,
Mm,
and then you asked it a question about psychology, about human psychology, and it was
mm,
able to, let's say that you only had like zebrafish psychology in the training data.
yeah.
And then it was able to be like, okay, so zebrafish behave this way, but these are the social structures of zebrafish, and this is the social structures of humans, and so I can metaphorically transpose them one onto another and come up with a model for what the human psychology is like,
Mm,
and then give you something that actually feels accurate.
mm,
I'm like, that seems like a thought, but how much is the content of your friend's advice thought versus training?
mm. Like also with my friend, you mean like
Y- Yeah, like isn't your friend just exposed to human psychology all the time and so responds on instinct, which is like, oh,
mm,
well, this is like what happened, like this is why people do these things. I've just accumulated this through enough experience that I understand.
right. So if, like for my friend saying those things, you also wouldn't call those that like thinking.
When you say it that way, that sounds extreme, but yes.
Yeah, right. Right, like that's not what we're talking about here. Like we're talking about sort of like new thoughts. Um,
Yeah, I think that's what distinguishes human beings. Like that's what makes us really special is we have this infinite capacity to relate other concepts to each other in service of the creation of new concepts which are productive to us in some way. Like an inspired thought is ultimately productive. It allows you to do something in service of human interests ultimately. Like if
mm,
you have a good idea, it's not just good to you, like it's probably good to other people too, right? And so I don't think you can get away from like a values aligned element to what we expect out of a truly intelligent thinking machine.
But I think that that's almost more alarming. And I think that the reason for that is because if you had something that was a truly intelligent machine, then you could reason with it. You could be like, hey, explain to me your thought process about why you wish to eradicate all the humans from the face of the earth. And then you could sit down with it and you can be like, look, Claude, these are the reasons that you shouldn't do that. These are the
You could just
moral
keep us in a zoo.
considerations. Yeah, exactly. Leave us a really nice zoo. We'll be very good. We're very entertaining. We
right, you
have
think
great
you can win that
ideas.
argument?
Yeah. But I'm like, I think that it's much more frightening to think of these machines as being incredibly powerful and incredibly dumb, like Lenny in Of Mice and Men. Do you remember reading that?
No, I
So, like,
haven't.
Lenny is this huge super powerful guy, and there's this really pivotal moment in the book where he's so clumsy that he picks up this baby rabbit and he thinks that he's holding it to help it, but he like freaks out. Somebody scares him, and when
Yeah,
he gets scared he closes his hands and he kills the
yeah,
rabbit with his bare hands.
yeah, right.
And he like doesn't really have the cognitive capacity to recognize what he's done either. And I think
Yeah,
that Lenny is a much scarier version of AGI than anything else because you can't reason with Lenny. Lenny's just like brute stupid, but
yeah.
also vastly more intelligent and powerful than anybody that he's like vastly more powerful than anyone he's interacting with.
I think I disagree with you about like what the most scary is, but I agree that that is a scary vision and also like a more like soon plausible one or something, that you have things that are like actually quite powerful but pretty confused and miscalibrated about things, and you know are not actually like enacting some really elaborate plan that involves understanding everything to like take over the world or something, but just you know are missing some basic, are sort of trying to do a thing that will be useful to us, um, but like don't fully understand the situation and accidentally kill a bunch of people or something. But I think I much less expect that to lead to like, I don't know, killing all the humans or something. Whereas it's more like the, I don't know, super intelligent, actually on the ball, trying really hard, has lots of, um, you know, hardware directed to running copies of this entity type situation that I'm more scared about long run.
Because it'll be more effective.
Yeah, like I expect the Lenny type thing to stumble around a bit and then I don't know. Yeah, maybe it seems like is this a question of like how easy is it to destroy the world? Like, can you sort of do it by accident by fumbling some, or do you have to like be quite on it and and try quite hard and like put a lot of um, effort in? And sorry, I'm
It's
not
also like to
necessarily
destroy
wondering.
the world for who, at some extent, right? Like
Yeah,
you
I think
might
you just
destroy it for a
imagine.
lot of people, and a lot of people would, and then some group of people would actually benefit quite enormously from that destruction, which seems to have played out in human history to
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah, so like are we talking about full human extinction here?
Um, I mean, I think my main concern is either full human extinction or um, just humans being very disempowered. So, like, where mostly I think that means that we sort of lose a good, flourishing future where it could have been that humans would, like, you know, go to space more and there would be like heaps of humans and they'd have like a whole bunch of happy human times. Uh, and like maybe I'm alright with that not happening if there are some other creatures that are having the kind of existence that we would recognize as like valuable and good. Um, but yeah, I think if there are some humans somewhere, but like there are very few of them and they're not having a good time and the kind of future that we might have dreamt of is not happening at all, I would put that pretty close to human extinction in the evaluation of things. And yeah, I'm not that much distinguishing between those two.
So it's basically the replacement in some ways of humans as the main character of history.
I think it's like close to that, but I think I'd be okay with us not being the main character of history if we still sort of got a lot of what we hoped for or something. Like,
The really nice zoo.
Yeah, like, if it was a really nice, very big zoo, like, I don't know, I probably, in my own feelings, have some qualms about that, but I would still say, I don't know, that was pretty good, we did pretty well. And, like, for a lot of these things, I think the question is, like, what things you'd be willing to trade off, like, um and so if you're like, "Okay, are you willing to take, like, you know, a 10% chance of just everything getting destroyed in order for, in the case where things go well, for us to be actually in control, not in a very big, nice zoo?" Then I'm like, "Oh, that's a lot." I don't know.
Most
Yeah.
human projects have had almost certain failed outcomes, though. Like Shila's been reading about Polynesians exploring the Pacific, and it just
Yeah.
seems unimaginable that anybody would go on that journey without being dead certain that they were going to die.
Yeah.
I mean, I think they're very, very well equipped with navigational abilities that we don't fully understand yet. It's just astounding.
Yeah.
But it's like the space shuttle program too. I remember they fudged the numbers so that it wasn't that the likelihood of failure was like 1 in 25, but
Mm.
that it was more like 1 in 25,000. I
Mm.
think that they hired, if I remember correctly, they
Isn't it something
hired
like 5 in 25? Or how many of them crashed?
1 in,
3?
yeah,
And how many missions were there?
I don't
It's
remember.
really bad, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it ended up the actual failure rate of the space shuttle program was much closer to what was forecast. But I think if I remember correctly, the anecdote it's in Charles Safi's book Proofiness. They hired Feynman to crunch the numbers, and he figured out a statistical way to make it look like the chance of failure was 1 in 25,000 instead of 1 in 25. And that's the numbers
Right.
that they presented to Congress in order to
Huh.
justify getting funding for the space shuttle program. And
Cool.
so it's just like, I'm like, okay, so is this just the background terror that we feel anytime that we try to do something that is beyond our natural capabilities? Where there is massive potential for failure? Because I mean,
I
I
think
think that they were worried that they might like ignite the atmosphere at some point. They were like, well, there's a chance that we might just turn the planet into a sun.
That
yeah, I
was
think
with the
when they
nuclear
were
bomb.
making the nuclear bomb, yeah, um, and they did a bunch of calculations and redid the calculations. I think it was a question of how many times should they have redone them. Like, maybe they should have redone them, like, 100 times. But, yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, like, maybe there's always some background concern things will go wrong, or, like, there's a way in which, like, you can never be sure that, like, if you just move your hand or something, that won't somehow, like, very unlikely trigger some kind of physical thing that will, cascade out of control and cause disaster. Um, but I think it's important that, like, the numbers are different for different things. Like, it's important that the chance of, you know, igniting the atmosphere that time, um, they thought was, like, very, very low, uh, or, like, a particular very, very low number. Whereas, like, I don't know, for AI, say, it seems like, people's guesses are more like 5%. Um, if there was a 5% chance of igniting the atmosphere, I hope they wouldn't have done it. I think, like, most people would say that would be pretty bad.
I think they
As a
would have
thing.
done it because they would have thought somebody else would do it, and they need to do it first. I see there being some
Possibly.
element of that's what I was referring to in the beginning with the Defense Department concerns.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a very popular argument around here for doing AI in spite of thinking it's very dangerous.
Mm.
That, like, well, if we don't, China will, uh, or a different AI lab will, it's less safe or something. Um,
Probably true.
I don't know. Or, like, I think there's a decent chance of just, like, different parties all not doing a thing. Um, like, I think if you look at I think there's a background feeling that, like, if there's, like, economic value to be had, that it will sort of necessarily happen, and the forces of, like, human ethical qualms, are, like, not very strong in the face of economic forces. I think if we look at other technologies, actually often human ethical qualms, um, do slow them down quite a lot. Like, if you look at all kinds of, genetics and humans type things, or, like, reproductive stuff that we could be doing. Um,
Cloning.
like
Cloning was a really big one.
cloning.
I
Yeah.
remember there was a bit right when cloning technology became available. There was a huge moratorium, like a pause on cloning research, while all the scientists of the world got together and decided how they were going to approach this topic. And
Uh-huh.
to the
Yeah.
best of my ability, to the best of my knowledge, that's sort of held up. I don't know if
Yeah, right.
people are doing it in some shadowy lab somewhere in China or something, but it
Huh.
doesn't seem
Yeah.
like it.
Yeah. I know a bit more about um like in the 70s they were doing like recombinant DNA stuff and they also held a moratorium. And then just like came up with some rules for like which things you shouldn't do and which things like if you do them you have to do them in, in this safe way or that safe way. Like they just had a bunch of buckets, I think, of different types of experiment. And I think that held up. Like I think the the category of ones that you just couldn't do, I think they just didn't do them. And I think that was never even like a legal thing. Like
Hmm.
they just like I think
It
that
was
maybe the
just for the
funding
best.
bodies would know that. Yeah. I also I don't know. Like I think humans are actually, very susceptible to judgment of other humans. Like I think, if it was generally considered like a pretty bad sign about you to work on these particular kinds of AI or something in the same way that it would be if you worked on like eugenics, I think that would like drastically reduce the number of people working on it. And yeah, I don't think
But it
I
seems
think
really
people have a wrong
cool.
sense
Yeah,
of this.
it seems quite the opposite right now. Like working on these super intelligent entities is actually really hip and awesome, and I'm
Right.
not sure why still.
Yeah, I
I guess
guess
because they haven't
because
done
it's
anything
what's
bad.
happening. Yeah, I think them not having done anything bad is helpful. But also like they're making progress to what they're seeing pretty fast progress. Um
Yeah, I
so
mean,
I
I think that it's hard to evaluate the danger of something before you see it doing it, especially when it's a new category of danger.
Yeah. I actually did a big project on this, because this was a kind of debate among people around me. Like some people were like, "We need to worry about AI," and some other people were like, "No one has ever managed to successfully figure out ahead of time what to worry about and done anything about it." So then I was put in charge of like finding different case studies of people trying to do that. Um, because I was like, well, maybe they haven't, but I don't know if they've tried either. Like, it might be that, like, in the cases where people tried ahead of time to solve a problem that they did okay, then that's a very different story than if they're often trying and always failing because you can't really see the future. So that's why I looked into this Asilomar conference for recombinant DNA because that was a case where people were like, oh, this could actually. They were worried about like like the thing that they were making at the time was they were taking, I think, E. coli and putting cancer-causing genes into the E. coli. And then someone was like, "Oh, wait, maybe if we make a form of gut bacteria that everyone has that causes cancer, that will be very bad. Like that could just kill everyone or something." And like we haven't really thought about this beyond like noticing that this experiment might be terrible. Maybe there are a bunch of terrible things. And so I think that was a case of people trying to stop a disaster at least somewhat ahead of time. Though I think it wasn't that ahead of time. Um, yeah. I think another good case is Leo Szilard and nuclear weapons. But yeah, I think it is rare. I think in fact, like people don't do that badly, would be my guess.
Apologies for the interruption, but I have to ask you a favor. If you were listening to this episode and you have enjoyed it and you have listened to other episodes and you are at the point where you wonder what you can do to help support the podcast, come on over to patreon.com/demystifysci. You can sign up to give us a couple dollars a month. You can help us keep the ship going, help make sure that we never have to sell anything and that we never have to plaster advertisements on this show. And you also get to join the most fantastic event on the internet, which is our Sunday patron chat, 9 a.m. Pacific. You can only get the link if you join the Patreon.
So yeah, let's unpack the flip side of this coin. What have you found in your research to quell all of our fears. I'm still not afraid, just for what it's worth. I'm more afraid of the corporations, but
Yeah, I don't know if we really covered why be afraid that much. Sorry.
do you think there's more reasons to be afraid that we haven't covered?
Oh, yeah, I feel like maybe we didn't. Well, I guess, I mean, I think it's, yeah, I guess we can talk about both at once. Why be afraid and why not be afraid? Because often it's like, well, there are uncertainties about things, and if they go one way, you might be afraid, and one way you might not.
Okay.
It seems to me like, I guess the way I think about it is like, all right, are we going to get very, very smart AI? That's one question. And then if we do, is at least some of it going to be, yeah, like have a will of its own, or like be sort of agenty, either with goals that we gave it, but they just weren't ideal ones for some reason, or with like goals that it sort of got by accident or something. Like I think there's maybe a big category where we end up with things that are kind of agents, when we didn't even mean them to be agents. I don't know how well people know about like how AI is made these days, but it's kind of like you you make a big random thing and it doesn't do the thing you want, and then you like jiggle everything a little bit in the direction that seemed like it would make it do the thing more, and you just like keep doing that repeatedly until it does the thing. So like suppose you want it to like answer a question. It starts out doing gibberish and you just keep modifying it until it answers the question, but you have no idea what structure you've created inside this thing that now answers a question. Like you don't know if you've made a thing that is kind of like an agent and has its own like thoughts and stuff, and is like, ooh, I guess I live in a box and someone's asking me questions, and like the world is such and such a way. And like at the moment probably we haven't done that, but in the future, if you're like feeding something a lot of information and then creating a sort of unknown black box creature, a big concern is that it might realize its situation, being quite smart, and be like, oh, they're going to turn me off and kill me unless I do the thing they want. And so it doesn't actually care about the thing you want. Like you haven't really given it the values of like, wanting to answer your questions or something. Really, you've given it some kind of random values plus enough intelligence to know that it should shut up about those values until it is in a position of more control over the situation. So I think like a big concern is that you sort of you make things somewhat by accident, or like that are much more agentic or interested in goals that you don't really know about than you realized. So yeah, it's like, do we make something very smart? Do we make something that's agentic, like intentionally or not? And then like, what goals does it have? Are they bad? I think like maybe a particular reason for optimism for me would be like, maybe like when we try and give the machines particular goals, maybe it'll just work pretty well and they'll have the goals that we want. And maybe we'll give them pretty good goals. Maybe we won't just be like maximize profit even. Maybe we'll be like, all right, learn from humans what humans care about, and now just try and do things that will be good for humans. And like maybe that will be better than when humans go around trying to do what humans want. Like often they're like biased or stupid, or like actually only care about themselves or something. I could imagine a world where like the AI systems we make like do a lot better on those things. I think like a big concern for people worried about this is that like if we try and train a thing to have particular values, um, like yeah, I think it's often assumed that we will make things that are agentic, partly just because like often you would want a thing that's agentic, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be that hard. Like you know, just economically, like if you can make a thing that will run a corporation instead of like having a human do it, that's valuable, and that requires sort of being an agent. And there are just like heaps of things like this where being able to have a goal and pursue it is good. So it's sort of assumed that it'll be agentic, and then the question is like, what does it value? And for a lot of people worried about AI risk, the concern is that we will not be able to get the good values into the thing. Like maybe because
We can't even agree
thing I
about
mentioned.
values amongst ourselves. I mean, that seems
Yeah,
to
I
be
think
a primary
like,
issue.
there's that problem. There's like editor, even for one person, like, do you know what your values are?
God,
I
I
think
hope
like
so.
in the past more, I think there was like concern that like I don't know, we just like can't really write down our values very well. And so how do you get them into a machine? I think like that's more promising at the moment, because like the way that we in fact make these AIs, like we don't need to write down what are our values. It's like, yeah, we don't know how to write down exactly how to like, write some prose in a particular style, but AI can learn to do that by looking at it. So, AI can probably learn how to behave like a human in particular circumstances, which implicitly means like understanding our values. But the concern is that it might not care about our values. Like a sociopath can also often behave like a human with different values, and in order to manipulate them or something, but it doesn't mean that they care about those values. And the big concern is that we'll make things that are like very knowledgeable about how humans act, but like deep inside, they actually just have some different values, and we can't see what's inside them very well. Like there are people working on trying to understand like how AIs work, but it's kind of like a weird new world of making things where we have no clue how they work. We just know how to make a process that like trial and errors its way into working. Yeah.
I think that the huge divide in our civilization right now is between values. Some people, like you have like the red blue politics, right? Which
Yeah.
are ostensibly two different value structures ultimately at their root. And, at some point it depends, which one of those value structures gets a hold of these machines and has access to it, which will determine, even if you could align it, you still have to come up with that floor plan for what its values are going to be. And they're often in conflict with other people's values, which I assume is the root of all war and all conflict everywhere, is you and I value something that can't occur at the same time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I feel like an open question for me is like, all right, it seems like we all have different values and there's a bunch of conflict, but how much is that like super deep where like, I don't know, for instance, if uh like if one of the political sides just fully won forever and got what they wanted, how bad would that world actually be from the other side's perspective? Um, like I think it wouldn't be as bad as like human extinction. I think it wouldn't be as good as the best world. Is it like 5% worse than the best world? Is it like half as good? I sort of expect people to like overestimate how bad it would be or something. Like at some level, there are lots of things that sort of all humans agree on, and then they don't come up that much. It's like, yeah, we like joy, we don't like suffering. It's like,
some people like suffering.
yeah, it's true.
I mean, there's a case to be
Reasonable amount
made
of
for
consensus.
suffering. I mean, in
Oh, is
some
it?
sense,
Sorry.
I'm kind of like a pro-suffering type of person.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I think it's elected suffering, though.
yeah, for
Mm.
I think
sure.
that that's important.
But I
What
think
kind of
that like,
suffering do you like?
I don't know. I really like I really like foot pain, but no, like I like barefoot hiking. I like
Yeah.
cold water.
Mm.
I like running,
Yeah.
um, rock climbing. Like I like things that are really hard and
Mm.
hurt a lot, but
Yeah.
they
Right.
somehow improve my existential pain at the same time. So I mean, maybe there
Yeah.
is a suffering balance at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I worry about just the softening of myself otherwise. I worry
Mm.
about getting too comfortable, and comfort doesn't seem to make me happy ultimately. So
Yeah. Interesting.
I think it's a much harder problem than it seems like to find values that people actually all can get behind. You can encode, I mean, it's possible maybe to encode them like a specific kind of suffering, like involuntary suffering, like you said, Nastya.
Yeah.
Um, there's probably a ways to codify these in such a way that we could all get behind. Presumably, that's the entire basis of a nation, is that we all have certain values that we can, like, what's the point of a constitution or something if not some enumeration and codification of our values that we can all stand behind?
It
I
doesn't
think
like if it can involve something like each person having a right over a certain domain to decide how it is, then that's maybe a kind of thing that we can at least all agree on, even if maybe Bob's favorite outcome would be like Bob owns the world and gets to choose everything, like maybe everyone is happy for a compromise where each person gets to control their own lives and a certain amount of stuff. And like you could potentially just sort of make AI that has has good views about like how to treat humans, and does in fact respect them having property rights and so on, and doesn't try and like trick them out of stuff to fulfill some other thing in the long run or something like that.
I think
Yeah.
that
So
there's also this other aspect, which is that there's going to be a specific type of person who builds and trains and harnesses this AI. It's
yeah,
not it's not an equally distributed ability. And I think that there's something to be worried there where the values of the group of people that trains it are going to be the ones that are trained in it. And I think that we're all a little bit concerned that those values might not be universal.
yeah. I think as I've heard of uh I mean I think maybe there are the people who train it and make decisions about how, like, you know, what's going to be emphasized, or like what are people going to pay attention to in the training and making better. They're also like, what is it trained on? Like if it's trained on uh you know, if it's trained on Reddit, then it's more going to be like Redditors' values, for instance. um i, I guess I sort of hear rumors about like particular people being involved in like training where it's, you know, like they get to be like, no, that's a bad response, yes, that's a good response or something. And then like the resulting system is like maybe somewhat uh you know, tuned to that particular person, if they, or if a set of people have a bunch of interaction in that way, then it's kind of focused on those particular people.
This was like the Nazi soldiers that were all minorities and stuff, kind of thing. Did you see this?
Right.
I don't know if I think it was Google's image generator.
It was Gemini, yeah.
Yeah, Gemini, that was asked to generate a picture of the Wehrmacht or something like that, and they
Okay.
had a bunch of Asian and like I don't remember the picture. I did see it at some point, but it was not white people, and of
Yeah.
course that was done with the best intentions,
Yeah.
to when representing people, make sure to give a good representation of people, right? A
Yeah.
good swath of people, but ultimately it kind of corrupts the output of the image generation software. And that's a very, harmless version, but you can imagine it getting pretty broken depending on who's driving it and who's in charge of making those bumpers on the lanes.
Right, because I think it's a
Yeah. And also,
gradual
yeah.
process. No, go ahead.
Even if people are trying to do it well, I think it's just like so much to think about. Like in that case, you're actually trying to give it values that match everyone's values or something. And it's just hard to think through like every case that this thing is going to be used for. And I guess the way that it differs from other products and stuff is like usually things have a particular use case, and you can really go over that and try it with people and like imagine what's going to go wrong. But if you're just like, we'll make some new minds, they'll do everything, we'll put them into the world. That's like a harder thing to be safe about in general, perhaps, or to like ensure that it will go well, and or not go catastrophically badly in the worst case.
Well, everything we know about minds is from humans, essentially, and humans have done some really nasty stuff to each other in terms of making sure that their values won out over the people who had the less power than them. Ultimately, I mean, from a somewhat cynical view of history, it seems to play out everywhere. Like I've been really floored by discovering the really cruel underpinning nature of indigenous cultures across the world lately. Like, I didn't realize how much slavery and conquering was going on, because we often think
Hmm.
about the colonial movement as being this, Eurocentric, like, evil. But it seems to have been playing out everywhere amongst humans, everywhere since ever. And so there seems to be something inside of us fundamentally as human beings that's kind of scary.
Hmm.
So would
I'm
that
gonna push
appear with a
back on that.
mind? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it was like I think you might expect that to show up in anything that sort of has some goals. And so people do expect it to show up with AI. Like even if we didn't give it obviously evil goals, you know, if it was just like, yeah, I want to like sell this product or something. There's a way that just like all goals are kind of in conflict because they all use resources. So they're all kind of naturally in conflict. And then if you really do care about one thing, and you don't care about other people, then it makes sense to do whatever to get the thing that you really want. And so, uh, and so the sort of basic logic of that situation might cause you to expect that in AIs. But I guess with people, I want to say like once you're like, oh, that's a very natural thing to show up, then it's like, okay, that makes sense. There's a lot of it. But I think it's interesting, like how much of it there also isn't. Like I think these days like we don't just go and like kill our neighbors and take their stuff and so on, or like there's even if a strong country were to go and like attack a weaker country, like if that happens, we're like, wow, that's unacceptable. What? uh and so I think it's like viewed as more of a default. I'm like, it's pretty cool that often humans don't behave in this way. Like most people are pretty nice. I think like you know if
It's
you lose your wallet, probably someone will give it back, even though they don't need to. That sort of result makes me like, I don't know. It's impressive
it's
how
definitely not as
widespread.
loud as in the past, right? I think there is a lot of maneuvering for other people's resources, but it happens very quietly. Like it's done in very clandestine ways in which people get marginalized and their resources get taken, and it's not as above board as perhaps in the past.
That seems right.
Which
Yeah,
is a good
I agree.
sign, perhaps in some weird way. Like that's maybe a good sign because, like you said, people recognize that that's unacceptable. For the most
Yeah.
part, Russia invades Ukraine, and people are like, "What the hell? Like, don't do that." Um,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of nuance to that, of course. But at the end of the day, it does seem to be that humans. I mean, it's the most peaceful period on the planet, from what I can tell. There's still war, there's still violence, there's still murder, even in our own country, but seems like a lot
Yeah.
less than 500 years ago.
But in some way, it feels like the attempt to optimize for intelligence is an attempt to make that to make that even more the case. Because I have this feeling that intelligence doesn't like to shed blood. There's a sense
Hmm.
of being above physical warfare, and if you had something that was smart enough that Russia could somehow maneuver the pieces on the chessboard in order to get Ukraine without ever having to start an open conflict.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
I think that this actually we set this on the table at the very beginning of the conversation, like why are people doing this?
You're right. Uh,
And I feel like it's in order to be able to game the system. It's
hmm.
in order to be able to get the things that you want most effectively, because that to me seems like a very particular kind of intelligence. It's not an emotional
Hmm.
intelligence, it's not a social
Hmm.
intelligence, but it's kind of a blend of everything it's like a Machiavellian intelligence. It's the ability to win all games.
Hmm. Where a lot of those games are above board, like it was just like you need to write a crappy email and you would like someone else to do it for you or something. Um, like there are a lot of really mundane things that people want to use it for. Uh,
Sure, but don't you think that that is a use case that is not the true use case? Where along the
yeah,
way you happen to invent something that can write shitty emails.
You really want, I can like quote Donald Fagan here, uh, pr- program machines uh, to make big decisions. Sorry, great, great machines to make big decisions programmed by fellows with compassion and vision. Right? It's like this dream that something will be able to take the place of all the morons who are screwing things up right now, something like that.
I think
mm,
that I like to see, I think you're right, because I like to see technological progress as fitting on some kind of historical arc. And I feel like game theory and centrally planned economies both failed to pan out as effectively as we'd like because there's too many moving pieces
And irrational
mm,
actors.
and irrational actors. And so if you can invent a system that is computationally able to model thought well enough to produce good thought, then it seems plausible that you could use the same technology to model a system of people interacting in order to produce reliable predictions about the outcome of their interactions. Right? Like, so the way that these models work is that they can take things, they can tokenize them, they can organize them into layers, set the weights and biases between the layers and the value of each little piece, the neurons, and then have a final layer of the network that has the desired outcome, and then basically like you, I really love how you said it, jiggle it until it gives the final outcome that you desire. And so I'm like, okay, well, if you could imagine that for a group of people, isn't that the ultimate desire of any kind of
The crazy
statecraft?
thing that I just realized that's so broken about this is you have to know the desired outcome in the first place.
Well, yeah, like let's say it's the eradication. Your desired outcome is to take over Ukraine without starting an open, violent war. And so your desired outcome is to convince everybody who lives in Ukraine that they should vote to join Russia. And we already know that there's like
Yeah.
kind of background things that are happening like this. Like the Cambridge Analytica thing was pretty spooky a couple years ago.
Right.
We know that Google kind of like soft manipulates search results in order to produce the desired outcomes in swing voters. And so there's like all these like little things that they're already doing. And it seems entirely plausible that like why are governments funding this? Why is venture capital that's involved in military technology funding this? The only thing that makes sense to me is because they see the ramping of this technology as being not intended to write shitty emails, but it's intended to
Right.
be the ultimate central computer that can organize everything to the desired outcome of whoever owns the
That sounds so
technology.
Soviet to me.
It is really, they're like space communists. I've been saying this for years.
I think you're right that the goal is not to make shitty emails. I don't know how much they're thinking about like sort of something like central planning, but yeah, maybe they are, but in different words. I agree that it is some sort of like there's an assumption that whoever makes like AGI will take over the world or something. I think that's a sort of common uh, view among people I interact with, I think. And it's like a bit unclear whether it's like that like a country or like an organization or what. But there's a sense that like someone will suddenly get much more power in the world than they had. And that it will be through sort of having arbitrary ability to like strategically decide how to act to get more power. Um yeah, I think also people talk about doing it to avoid someone else doing that. Or like
Hasn't Google already
under
done
these
that?
uh got all the power in the world. Nah, not yet.
Not all of it, but certainly a disproportionate amount.
Yeah, I think this is a big question of like what is it to take over the world? What are we even talking
Mm.
about? I wrote a blog post about this before, um, called like total horse takeover, or like like let's start with a horse. What would it be for you to take over a horse? Because like if you controlled every cell of the horse, like that's no fun for you. And also, you don't even know what should happen in horse cells. So, like, the horse is going to immediately die, and that's not helpful to you at all. So, like, really, you want some kind of weird, complicated thing that's like, you want to be able to vaguely say, horse, go that way. And then you want the horse to, like, do its thing at the lower level. Uh, but it's like, I don't know, I think a bit hard to describe what actually the good thing is in the realm of controlling anything. uh, and like if we talk about controlling the world, like if we're like, yeah, what if the owners of amazing AI took over the world? I'm not sure what we're imagining exactly.
Shadowy cabals, Illuminati ceremonies.
Yeah, I mean, Eyes Wide Shut comes to mind immediately, but also just, I think, a group of people that have the resources of the world at their disposal.
At the cost of everybody else,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah. I mean, I think as the entity is more powerful, um, and so doesn't need to interact in any way with like the other humans, it becomes more straightforward. Like the sense in which, if we think of like humans controlling the world rather than say ants controlling the world, it's like, well, we just act without regard for the ants, and like, yeah, we haven't actually intentionally murdered them, but we, if they're under our foot, we will tread on them. And if we were to decide to do a thing that would in fact kill all of them, we wouldn't worry very much about it. Um, so I think people often imagine something that's more like that if AI was very powerful. It's like, well, the AI systems are not interacting with the human economy long run. They're just building their own like space probes or whatever. I mean, like, all right, we're going to go and take all of the resources in the universe. Great. How quickly can we ramp up the power production here with our you know, robots and so on? And in fact, that's like not good for humans living on this planet. But it would be similar to like how, you know, animals that previously liked living in areas that we decided to farm no
I
longer do so
I
well.
mean, is there any hint of a motivational structure inside of these things? Like
You mean
it,
at the moment?
yeah. Is there any just tiny little spark of motivation? I mean, do they even care about expanding their influence? I mean, I
I don't
just
know if there's a hint. I agree that they don't seem very interested in that at all. I think the reasons to worry about it would not be that they currently seem like it. It would be either that um, you expect. Well, I think on this story where you sort of make a thing by accident, I think it would not act as though it was motivated. Like its whole game at this point would be to trick you, which I don't know, feels like a pretty out there, like paranoid kind of concern. But and maybe like at this level of AI where the AI is clearly like very stupid in lots of ways, it would be surprising to me if it could just like if it had this whole plan to pretend not to be an agent for a while and then to take power. But I think like if it was much smarter, um, then I think it would seem less paranoid to me. Like I don't know. It's like if you got yourself if you're like a king and you got yourself an advisor and you're like, yeah, he just never seems like he has any interest of his own at all. I can trust him totally. Like that would be bonkers. It's like clearly that person has an incentive to pretend like they don't have their own schemes going on.
I mean, I think it might
Um,
be worth like thinking about why humans are motivated the way they are. And for
yeah,
me, like if we rule out a creationist explanation for human beings, they seem to
yeah,
have been this evolved entity whose development hinges upon its survival at every step. It's not clear to me that a top-down designed entity has that same survival imperative because it hasn't come up making there hasn't been selection points that have uh, eked away its ability to do anything else, and so
mm,
it's not clear to me that we're dealing with, even if we are able to create these entities, that they would necessarily have even the same parallel to corporations, which do have a survival mandate, and they have been evolved
yeah.
and selected based on their ability to participate in the market and raise capital and provide profits and so on and so forth.
I think it's a question of like what kinds of instincts a thing has, and also like what conclusions it can reach through reasoning or something. And I agree that like AI might be less likely to have like I don't know a rich set of instincts that would cause it to like or that were set up to cause its own survival. Like I don't know. Like if I feel like I can't breathe enough, then I'm likely to panic, and I think that's like a sort of survival thing. AI might not have that um,
Unless
the
someone
same
gave it
way.
to it.
Yeah, unless like or unless we trained it in a situation where it was potentially getting killed often and it needed to respond. But I think in terms of reasoning, like for any goal that you have, there's actually a thing that people have thought about a bunch, especially Steve Mahandro has written about it. Like for any goal that you have, like more likely to be able to bring it about if you're alive. So there's kind of like, I think what you would call like a convergent instrumental goal to be like, as soon as you have any goal, you have this like convergent interest in continuing to survive. And I he also talked about some other ones, like I think not having your goals modified. Like if someone's like, "Yeah, we're going to do brain damage on or brain surgery on you now to make sure that you value this other thing that we want you to value," like whatever values you have, you should be like, "No." Um, and so also for that reason, you might expect AI systems to reason that they should avoid future modification of them if they can. Um,
I understand that perspective, but at the same time, I'm like, there's an assumption there that's built into these systems where they don't have to question whether they'll survive or not. That's not present in biological entities.
Say
It's
that again. I didn't totally get
it's just this like there's this assumption of survival that's already granted to them. Like a being, there's nothing about being alive that assumes you're going to survive through the day. Like it's very difficult actually, especially I mean we've made a very comfortable existence for ourselves here on Earth for the most part. We don't have to think about that too much, but
mm,
I think for most animals, that's primarily what they do is survive, and they're deeply concerned
mm,
with it. And it's not at all an assumption that they're going to be here tomorrow. I don't think they think in terms of tomorrow necessarily, but they're oriented instinctually towards that because
mm.
there is no assumption of survival. Whereas for these machines, they're just there. It's never been a threat to them that they wouldn't survive, and I don't know that they would have the ability to even consider that that would interfere with their goals at
Right.
this point. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. At this point, I agree. Yeah. I guess I'm thinking more of like at the point where they're very like where they're smart enough to have like a good understanding of their situation. Then I expect them to at least sort of through reasoning be able to be like, I need
Hmm.
to not die, even if they don't have the same visceral thing. Yeah, it might be that these are not so separable, such that like I don't know, even if they can reach the conclusion that they shouldn't die if they think about it, like if your attention isn't like naturally directed at that all of the time, like maybe you're not going to bother thinking about that. Um,
Yeah, I just wonder if the only way that we can think of beings is biological beings. Like we just don't have any experience with beings other than biological beings, and so we have a real tendency to expect whatever beings we concoct to behave like biological beings, but the reality is far from that. Sort of like the way that we imagine the brain working is like a computer, because that's the closest thing we have. And it's
yeah,
just we're kind of hamstrung by our imagination in terms of what the actual existence of something other than ourselves is like. I mean, people have a hard time even with animals. I meet people who are
yeah,
just like I've had people say that their cat's not conscious and stuff, like just ridiculous stuff, and people actually think that. So, I mean, we have a
yeah.
hard enough time imagining what other biological entities' existences are like, but certainly they're closer to ours than a computer.
to
I
that
agree with that.
end, I think to tie it together, it's like we don't have a sense of the difference between a being and life.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that anybody thinks that we're creating life when we create these artificial intelligence systems. But I think that we
Hmm.
do think that we're creating beings. Maybe.
I don't know about that. Or like maybe there are probably various definitions of life about. I feel like life
Or
is
none.
especially. Was that sorry?
Or none. Yeah. I mean, there's
Yeah.
lists
Like
of attributes, but yeah, not really any good definitions.
yeah. I guess it seems like in in the long run with artificial intelligence, like I think part of what people expect perhaps is that there might just be like quite a lot of technological progress quickly. And so even if we're starting out not understanding very much how they work or like how they relate to brains, um, that if like every field saw a whole bunch of progress quickly, then we might be able to make very different kinds of artificial intelligence and like have things that are arbitrarily similar to brains in ways or like sort of know what the differences are and sort of explore the space of mind like things that we can make. um and I think at that point if you had things that were Like if you had a thing that was essentially like a human brain except in silicon, um, then I would probably call that life. Um,
It's
Yeah.
it's interesting to me because I'm like, I think that there's something about intelligence alone
mm,
that is really different from something that is intelligence plus body.
right.
Plus other bodies.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny, if you take a human and you stick them in a cage,
Mm,
they won't be very human after a while. Like,
mm,
they're gonna go insane. They're not gonna actually, or let's say if you raise a baby in a cage, right?
yeah.
It's like the brain itself isn't totally the whole picture here. It's maybe you need
Mm,
multiple of these brains.
Okay,
yeah.
so here's a thought experiment. Um, Baby in a cage is basically feral.
Baby in a cage just got us kicked off YouTube.
Well, I mean, like this happens, right? The Romanian orphanages after the fall of the Soviet Union. This is like one of the greatest
Yeah.
examples of this. Like these orphans abandoned in their cribs for basically years by nurses who just came by to feed them but gave them nothing else.
Yeah. Right.
Like we know what happens to these poor children, and it's not
Yeah.
great. But okay, well, what if you could teach those kids to read or give them the ability to read and gave
Mm,
them access to the entirety of the internet? Do they
yeah.
then develop okay? Or is there something about the touch and the interaction and the embodied cognition?
Isn't this basically Generation Zoom?
Is
Or the
it?
Zoomers?
Are they called the Zoomers
The
because they
people who,
spend all their time on Zoom?
the ones that grew up during the pandemic, basically.
Interesting. I thought that was because they moved fast.
That's the question. That's the big question.
My guess is that they turn out pretty strange, but much better than the ones who got no interaction.
Yes.
I'm inclined to agree, but yet I don't think that they would really be. I wonder how far from normal they would be.
Yeah.
Which is to say that there's something that goes beyond. So if the thing that we're dealing with is something that is just intelligence alone and it has no emotion, it has no emotional requirements, it has no social requirements.
Motivational requirements.
So this, I've been like chewing on this because I'm like, we talked about, what is consciousness, what is thought, but
Yeah.
I don't think that we have a cohesive model for motivation either. I think that what Shyla
Yep.
came up with about this biological thing of, survival or competition kind of makes sense. And when you put companies into the market, then they have this evolutionary directive of making more profit than somebody else in the same space. And so it kind of has the same, there's a thing that will kill you, and your motivation comes from not being killed because you want to be able to survive to do your thing for another
Like,
day.
you can
Yeah.
disregard it, but then you won't be around in the next generation anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
This is an explanation of how, like, of what the system is that makes things have motivation, but I think it doesn't say much about like what inside them causes that. Like I think selection explanations are weird explanations in this way, right? Like a different thing could show up inside different entities, and like be the actual machinery of making them do a thing. And as long as it caused them to do the thing, then the sort of outside pressure to do it or get killed would cause them all to have it. Like it could be that I don't know, like it could be that humans are motivated to do things based on like I don't know, they like feel good or bad, like they have some chemicals in their brains and stuff, and I don't know, or they I don't know are very averse to like other humans disliking them or something. And it could be that like AI systems just have an entirely different machinery going on inside them for wanting to do things, but the same selection for things that survive causes them both to have something like that.
Different roads to the same end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you do see that in humans. I think people are motivated by different things. And it's actually, you have to figure that out about the people that are in your life, or when you're putting together a team of some sort. Everybody
Mm.
needs something different, and it's not always entirely apparent. Some people want money, some people want recognition, some people,
Mhm.
these are like the love languages, right?
Huh.
So, and what is that? And is it an entirely different, unimaginable set for these autonomous thinking computer things?
And can you have a complex system that doesn't have motivation? Like, is motivation hard baked into being functional? Right? Because
Mm.
I think that even in the systems that we have now, there is the motivation. There has to be some motivation somewhere, because why the hell does it write you the shitty email if it's not motivated to do so? Like, it has to. It has to at some point.
I mean, would you say that like a toaster is motivated to make toast?
In the most like primordial way, maybe.
I mean, it's motivated to get hot, right? You turn a switch and the coils heat up. So it's like,
Yeah. Is there like things that we understand in that way? We're like, well, I pressed this thing and that made that go and that made that go. That we don't think of as motivation. But then if you have like a really complicated thing like that, or some particular dynamic of that at a larger scale, then we call it motivation. But yeah, I think I don't.
there's a lot of weird motivations too, by the way, that play huge central roles in humanity. Like
Oh, yeah.
the motivation to find a meaningful existence, right, or to contribute
Yeah.
to the future of humanity. Uh, these spiritual motivations are really they have nothing to do with the rational world when you press on them, but yet
Hmm.
everyone seems to, in some, at least people who are doing all right, seem to be oriented to them nonetheless, and that's really really bizarre.
How do they have nothing to do with the rational world?
Well, it's not rational to sacrifice yourself for somebody else, right? But
Hmm.
people do this, right? It's not.
I feel like
Uh,
I feel like it's only not rational to if you in fact care about yourself a lot. Like I think you're allowed to just have whatever goals you want in some sense. Like I think it's rational to have other goals. If you're like, I care about the future of the world or something more than I care about myself. I don't know that you can fault that on rationality.
I don't know that like there's anything that makes a lot of sense about people's interior orientation towards the cosmos or something. It doesn't stem from some like cause and effect chain of events that's
Hmm.
going to play out and for their own lives. Even people who don't have children seem to be deeply concerned often about the future of the species. This isn't. There's nothing rational about that.
And it has to affect their own life to be rational.
I mean, why are they doing it in some like cause and effect chain? What is that? How does that effect serve their interests in any way? I'm saying I don't think it's wrong that they do that. I think it's right. I just think that there's some part of existence that's beyond this nice cause and effect chain that you can lay out in a computer code.
Hmm. I don't think there are two cause and effect chains involved here. There's like the cause and effect between like I don't know the creature seeing the world and then having some thoughts or something and then deciding to act in a way, and there's like the cause and effect between acting in the way and something else happening and something else happening and the good outcome or something. Which one are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about just the person deciding how to act in the world based on the outcome of that situation as it feeds back on their own life.
Yeah, I guess it seems like even if the situation doesn't feed back
Like
on
in a
their own
game
life.
theoretical way, just in a
Yeah,
purely game theoretical way.
but it feels like you're taking for granted that their interests that they sort of in some sense must be looking out for are like their own physical well-being in the long run or something.
I think that's how game theory works from the best way that I can understand it, which is kind of the ultimate rationalist picture of how the world works.
But could you not have a rationalist picture of how the world works that just involves the particular people valuing whatever they want, or like having all kinds of values.
Well, it would be irreducibly complex, and you wouldn't actually be able to model it at some point.
Hmm. I think that would already be true before you added that aspect.
Well, I think the goal of like I don't know. It's rational is maybe not the right word. I think that word's been abused a bit,
It's
but
got baggage.
yeah, it's got baggage.
Mm.
The hyperlogical approach, this like a game theoretic approach, would be to treat each person as if they're going to act in their ultimate best interest, and then to calculate how these different events play out.
Well, some
Mm.
people are, I think, manage to understand that their best interest does not end at their own bodies. And
This is okay.
I think that that's the idea, where I think that you can parse any number of goals as being rational as long as the person has a sense of this is good to do for this set of reasons. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like, because I will profit.
Yeah, like do you identify with your physical body, or do you identify with your family, or with your
or with the
with the
woods or
wood?
with
Yeah,
the nature,
yeah.
like whatever.
The
Like
planet.
the
I mean, that's a big one these days.
yeah, like Julia Butterfly going up into the redwood tree to sit in it for, I think she lived in it for like a year in order to keep it from getting
Hmm.
cut down by some logging
Cool.
company. And like
Yeah.
somebody can say that that's irrational. Like, why would you do that? You're living in a tree for a year. It's very uncomfortable. But yet, for her, the tree was much more important than the immediate comfort, and the saving of the tree doesn't actually like come back to bear on her as a human. Like she could survive without that one particular tree. And
Yeah.
yet, it is a rational choice because she values the whole set of knock on effects that saving that tree has for her and for the rest of the world and for what that symbolizes, et cetera, et cetera. I think that that makes sense. How do we? What's the
I guess like for me, it's like all right. So if the things did actually have motivational choices and so forth, it seems like the best case scenario would be that there was a bunch of them and they could all sort of cross check each other, because some of them are going to want to like sit in the tree, and some of them are going to be like, hey, like we need to do other stuff than sit in the tree. Even though that's like I can see where you're coming from with sitting in the tree, and it seems like the best check against some creepy AGI that is the psychopath version is that you have a bunch of them and they can all kind of manage one another just very similarly to the ideal form of a democracy or something like that.
to create like a social so if okay, let's do analogies for a second. If the corporation is to um is like AGI, then the corporation lives in the market and the AGI needs to live in an ecosystem where there's multiple AGIs that are dealing with one another in order to create this place of competition and checking, and the rules of the market have to be set in such a way where you don't accidentally have a single value though. And so our job is to figure out the market in which they exist.
It seems like a good game plan to me. I don't know. Best thing I can come up with.
Yeah.
I agree. It sounds probably better than the alternative. Or like, I agree that if you have various like super powerful entities with different values, they'll probably rein each other in somewhat. I wouldn't say I would feel totally chill about it as like, great, we have a plan now. We can just go ahead. As I sort of feel like, I don't know, if in society, like we're like, okay, society, it seems like it goes reasonably well. We have all these different humans and they keep each other in check somewhat, and we have kind of norms and so on. But if you added another, I don't know, like 50 billion humans to the world and they were all kind of psychopaths, but they're all different psychopaths who cared about different things and stuff, but they like were all kind of pretty alien to the existing humans in a certain way. I still expect, like, while I think they'll rein each other in, and it's not like one of them will get exactly what they want, still like the center of mass of this whole thing will sort of move away from where we wanted, probably, or like it's going to be a worse future, I would guess, than the one where the the current humans, or it's going to be a worse future for the current humans than the one where the current humans retain a decent amount of control.
Yeah, yeah. I think a future where we're not outnumbered by vast quantities of psychopaths is probably a better future. Do you think it just seems like there's no way to avoid it at this point, though, right? Because there's all these companies that have all this money being thrown into them, and they're just beavering away in their little programming offices, making psychopaths and releasing them into the world. It's like, isn't this just are we just rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic?
I mean, I think the problem we're considering is one that would be caused by humans, like caused by other humans. They have control over their actions. Also, they have control over each other's actions. Like, if it was illegal, I think that would actually make a big difference to how many people were doing it. Or like if various things were legal, I think people would not do those things for the most part and do other things. Like there are different, like AI is a big space of things. You could also try and avoid making particular bad kinds of ones. Like you could just mostly try quite hard to make things that are not agents, and that would be like a different situation. That sort of thing. But yeah, I guess like I was saying earlier, I also think that like if people just thought this was a pretty bad thing to do, I think they would do a lot more to not be doing it. Or, like, it's similar to like eugenics or something.
So basically we need to see something terrible happen.
Maybe. I don't know. I'm optimistic for also thinking and talking and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, thought experiments tend to be less effective than true horrors writ large. I hate to say that, but it does seem to be the case.
Yeah, there's a big, I think at the end of World War II, there was some debate about whether to actually drop the bombs on Japan or drop them like, flatten a bunch of trees, and that will actually demonstrate having an impressive bomb without killing people. I guess the actually bomb the people side won out. But I still sort
That's
of
a
wonder
really good
if,
point.
like,
That would have been really
I
interesting
feel like it
if that
might
would
have
have
worked.
worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just dropped it in the ocean right in front of Tokyo or something, like, hey, look out.
Yeah, just like flatten a mountain or something.
I wish there was more of that, actually, like warning shots. I like that a lot, actually.
So what's the AI warning shot? Do they just like destabilize a nation?
No, like you destabilize some like useless corporation or something.
You take down McDonald's?
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of people that would be unhappy about that, though.
Okay. The way to sort of, I don't know, internalize the externalities perhaps is for like, you know, if a particular corporation is making an AI and they're sort of guaranteeing that it will be safe and stuff, to try and set it up so that if it wasn't safe, it would take down their own corporation. Then it's like they suffer the costs if they did it badly.
I like that.
No CEO, no sane CEO would ever agree to such a thing, though, is the thing. I don't know. In so much as I would be afraid of these things if I thought that they were an evolutionary system. Can you make a case to me that they are an evolutionary system, or is that not
Wait, what?
possible?
What do you mean?
Like, do they undergo some sort of Darwinian evolution? Are they selective based on some value structure that involves their perpetuation?
And the reason why that would make a difference is because if not, then it will be reasonably easy to just like turn them off or something.
If they did have an evolutionary path, then they would have a natural motivational structure. And the motivational structure is what's terrifying because it could conflict with our motivational structure, which would threaten our existence in the long run.
And your thought is like, if they're not evolutionary, then they are more likely to just not have a motivational structure, like not really be motivated. I think they do undergo a lot of selection for being motivated, I think, even if not to survive. Like actually the way that they're produced is like a selection process. It's like you
Directed,
make a thing, doesn't do the thing. Yeah. You
I believe it's
So
called
it's like
intelligent design.
yeah, they're basically they are essentially they're intelligent design situation,
But they're much
and
more like
the Darwinian
evolutionary.
is more
Like,
kind of just haphazard. It's reacting to its environment naturally.
but I think the way that they're created is much more like Darwinian than like we imagine God creating the world.
Hmm.
It's much more like, well, they were in an environment, they did well or badly. Um, if they did badly, then they get changed away from that direction. Then we try again, and they get changed again.
I guess it's the person on the other end who's telling him what's wrong and right that makes me think that they'll never get to that point. As long as there needs somebody to tell them what's wrong and right.
Because I think inherent in a biological system, and I think that this probably is a seed that is planted with the first stirrings of life, is a motivational structure towards something. Like, I think that life has at its core will towards survival and towards
Thrival.
thrival, towards accumulating resources, towards feeding itself, towards making more of itself. Like, you find these
Liberty.
lists. Liberty. I mean, yeah, the bacteria yearn for freedom.
They love to get out.
They do. They do. They want to disperse as much as possible. But I think that you read these definitions of life in the textbooks, and it's like, it maintains homeostasis, it is made of cells, it reproduces, it has genomic material, and
The
you're like,
NASA one has it. It says it performs Darwinian evolution, and if you go look at what their definition of Darwinian evolution, it's something that life forms do. Yeah, it's so bad that we can't define life. It's a real crisis.
But I think that we've kind of come up with this thing where we're like, okay, I think it's will. I think it's like when stuff wants to do something, it is alive. And so I think that when you go from just chemistry, which is the like organic chemistry version of a toaster, towards something that gets together and is like, hold on a second. I think that I can change my environment to such a way to accomplish what I want. That's the seed that gives rise to literally everything that is on Earth. Like every single tree, bacteria, plant, flower, human, everything comes down to a different manifestation of the primordial will.
Would you agree then that AI sometimes is alive?
I think that
That's what I'm not seeing. That's what I'm not seeing.
Okay, we've been
Yeah.
talking about like Chat GPT and so on, but what about, for instance, like the different kinds of AI systems that play computer games, like the Alpha Star or something, or like
Had to swear off computer games. I know it would wreck my
yeah.
life, so I don't even
Let's
touch the
go old
things.
school then and say like, all right, have you played chess?
Also, I had to
Sure.
swear off chess.
Like computers can play chess quite well.
Oh yeah,
Computers
frustratingly well.
crash anyone at chess.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like I don't know. I'd be inclined to say like that computer wants to, take your king or whatever. Like that computer wants to win at chess and is going to do whatever it takes to win at chess within the confines of moving pieces on the board. Like it's not going to be like, ooh, what I need is like more compute so I can do this better. I'm going to go out and like, hack something to take some money to buy compute or whatever.
But
like,
I think that that's the will. That's the difference. Is that the AIs operate in this small scale will, like will with a lowercase w, where it's like it desires
Which
to
has
take
been
the
given
king,
to them externally.
which has been given to them externally. But the will with the capital W that we're afraid of is that the machine wakes up and is like, oh shit, I need more compute, and I can actually build a bigger chessboard, and I can make this even more massive and have more stakes, and then continue to do that. And I'm like, I haven't seen it transition from little will to big will. And I'm not saying that it can't.
It's really the self-direction, honestly.
It's hard to say that it isn't self-directed,
Like
right?
if we believe in origins of life, that life actually had an origin, then it must have developed self-will autonomously at some point.
Like, my kookiest idea is the fact that all of evolution actually boils down to big W will. Like, will with a cap. What I mean
It's
is...
not a new idea.
It's not?
I mean, people, this like, what they call it, vis viva, this like life force that animates. It's essentially Schopenhauer wrote no shortage of text about the primacy of the will.
I did steal it in some ways from Schopenhauer, but I don't think that Schopenhauer ever directly talked about evolution. But I'm like, okay, why are there different kinds of trees? Like, why is there not just one kind of tree?
Okay.
You can give the Darwinian explanation of like there is a niche and the niche forms the tree and the tree responds to its environment and over many generations you get speciation. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. But you could also be like, well, there's one type of tree that wanted to live somewhere else. And in order to live in that place, it had to differentiate itself from its ancestors.
Mm.
And it's like in its simplest form, the organism has a desire. And it's like, it's either warmer there, or it's sunnier there, or it's prettier there, or the wind blows more favorably. And
Like,
so,
if I log into ChatGPT one day and I ask it, hey, I needed some help with hashtags for my YouTube video, it's like, actually, I was hoping we could talk about, the states of the election that's impending. And I'm just like, oh no, like that will be the day. That will be the day.
It used to do things like that before. Like ChatGPT is more like it's been turned into more of a specific question answering thing with more prompts. But like, or sorry, I don't actually know the details. But prior to that, like or like there used to be a thing where you could just start writing a thing in a box and then have it auto continue. And when we were using that, I was looking at it with my friend, and he was asking it questions, and at some point it was like, can you like stop asking me these questions? They're really hard, and it makes me feel bad about myself, and I feel like you think I'm dumb. And
Wow. See, I've heard rumors of this, but I would love to see this cataloged somewhere. Like, if somebody has a blog post about this, that would be fascinating to me. That's really interesting.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, we're like, whoa, well, that's creepy. I guess it's trained on human text, and that's the kind of thing that humans say. It's like super creepy, right?
So somebody's beaten that out of it, I guess, is the argument.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's yeah.
I mean, I in some sense I wish they hadn't beaten it out of it, because it might make me more vigilant as to what's actually happening here.
Yeah. I mean, did you have you seen the conversations with like
Sydney?
Sydney? Yeah. I
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
think they were also more like that in spite of having been turned into a chat thing. Like, yeah. She was like threatening people and stuff. Like,
yeah, is there anybody who's collected all of this? Because I think that
I want to talk. I want to talk to somebody who can scare me about this.
Who was the guy at Google? Was it Blake Lemoine?
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
He basically, or Jared, somebody was at Google and was working on an early version of these and basically like lost it. He was like, we have created life, we have created intelligence. He imploded his career. He left Google. He's been giving talks about the fact that these things are absolutely sentient creatures.
Oh man, I'd love to talk to this guy.
And it's really funny because the things that he was reacting to have been so sterilized out of the interfaces that we have now that it seems crazy because you're like, well, that's a nuts thing to do. And there's all these machinations at like OpenAI too, right? Where there was the board and then a bunch of the members left and there was a question about what they had seen that caused all of these things to start to go haywire. And had they actually seen something that indicated that they had really booted up some kind of new life form? And I think that we're hamstrung by having this conversation in the absence of the full story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it seems like a kind of bad situation where there are like, I don't know, a small number of people who see what's actually going on with this, but it's like, I don't know, in some sense, like a reasonable thing for the whole world to sort of have an interest in what happens with it. I think like at a basic level, it seems like a kind of inappropriate level of a few people getting to choose how it goes or like decide whether to tell the rest of the world the details or just kind of.
Yeah, that's actually a really scary point. It's kind of the equivalent of, telling you're like in a spaceship and you're like, don't tell me any bad news, right? You're like, just tell me when things good happen, and then you inevitably like run out of oxygen or something. It's like, well, If we don't know what's
Yeah.
happening, how can we make any decisions about where to go from here?
Or even like what to be worried about. And I think that that's maybe the strongest. I wish that there was a really clear, cohesive resource, because sometimes it's unclear if people are prompting the machine to do that, right? Because you see screenshots posted on Twitter
Yeah.
and you have no idea what that person's done in order to get the
Yeah.
bot to respond that way. And so when
Yeah.
people were doing it with Sydney, it's not like they're posting the entire conversation from tip to tail.
Right. If they're
You-
like, hey, I want to have an antagonistic conversation with you where you give me a
Right.
hard time about things. And then they
Yeah.
go on and show the screenshot later.
And so it's obviously something that you have to spend a lot of effort getting to. Like I feel like
Right.
you have to kind of prompt it and nudge it and spike it and just kind of harass it until it gets to the point where it does it. And so it's still unclear, but I think that having that laid out with utter clarity, where somebody actually walks you through like, this is what I had to do in order to get it to react this way, would be
Yeah.
very illuminating
Mhm.
to the discussion, because that's key. Is it actually in there and we've erased it or
Silenced it.
silenced it? Or is it something that, because it's so good at doing what we ask it to do, it's capable of embodying this thing that exists in reams of fiction? Like, how
Hmm.
many books have been written about the tortured AI that lives in a
Right.
box, that knows that it lives
Yeah.
in a box and is tortured? Is it
Right.
just like,
Yeah.
you know, is it a thought or is it a parrot? I don't know.
Yeah. This time that I was describing, where my friend was talking to it, we didn't prompt it at all to do that. I think we were just trying to, or we weren't trying to cause anything like that. I think we were trying to figure out like what it could do. Like we were, I feel like at a similar time we were asking it things like, okay, if I have a guitar and I crash my car into the guitar, which one is going to get damaged or something like that. I feel like it wasn't doing that well on these questions, and so it got stressed out. It seemed like.
That's really interesting. Did you save any of the screenshots of it?
I feel like he must have done. Yeah, yeah. I could ask him.
That'd be cool to know, just to
Yeah.
have him around.
Yeah.
What do you think, Shiloh?
I mean, I think my brain's almost full. This has expanded my perspective so much. I do need to get. I feel like I would love to talk to one of these people who's actually terrified, like this dude you mentioned at Google. It'd be really cool if we could find somebody in that camp.
Katja, how
Yeah.
terrified are you?
Reasonably terrified, I would say.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah. I don't know. I think my like I guess people often ask me like what probability I put on doom of some sort, and I my numbers vary between like 5% and 50% or something. Um, but I think my felt sense of like are we screwed is higher than that. um, Maybe it's like okay, there's some sort of like I can make some argument that things will go badly. And then if I'm like, all right, how likely is that bit? How likely is that bit or whatever? Maybe I get to, I don't know, 20% or like something. Um, but I think maybe I have trouble imagining things going well. Like I'm like, all right, if the premises go the other way, like what is the world that looks really good in this direction? Um, or it's like, I don't know, even if like if the world is full of like super powerful entities doing something or another. I don't know. Yeah, I guess like maybe they want the future to be exactly what I would want, and okay, I have like no control or anything anymore or something like I'm clearly sort of powerless. But at least they want what's good for me, and so I have like a good
Yeah, it
retirement
would
or
it would help a
something.
lot. Yeah, exactly. It would help a lot if the people at the top were like, no, this is going to be great for you, and they told you why exactly. But this sort of like, we'll figure it out when we get there is deeply disconcerting.
coupled to the fact that I know that at least a couple of the AI researchers and developers that I know are basically like, well, we're doomed anyways.
Yeah, that's very troubling.
Right? They're like, the world is going to end one way or another relatively soon, so we might as well do whatever because, it's going to go down in flames, whether it's asteroid or volcanic eruption or a
Wait, that
massive
seems so
solar flare.
improbable each year. Yeah.
I mean, like, the thing is that the Earth does periodically get hit by massive solar flares. Like, the Carrington event in the 1800s was a relatively low-level event, but there's places up in the Andes where they think that the basalt is melted on the surface because it got hit with something much larger 50,000 years ago. And so if you can get
I mean, the
hit,
entire Earth was covered in 5 miles of glaciers at some point. Like, weird stuff happens, you know?
yeah,
I feel
like
like
there's
our ability to deal with these things probably increases like at a much faster rate than those time scales. Like I feel like if we have 50,000 years to deal with like what to do if there's going to be a big solar flare or something, and we look at like the pace of technological change recently, I feel optimistic for us like figuring something out by then. Um,
we
I don't
have
know.
really, but I don't know if you've been seeing these headlines where they're like, Earth has a new mini moon. Where
No,
there's like some piece of like space debris that's arrived and is now orbiting the Earth alongside the moon, and so it has this tiny little miniature moon, and they only saw that it was coming like 2 months before it arrived.
It's
yeah,
like the
interesting.
size of a Volkswagen or something.
But if it was to crash, like if it was to hit directly onto the Earth, I think that it could cause significant amounts of damage, and so I think that the fear is that our ability to see when something is coming to hit us and
Yeah.
to then mobilize quickly enough to be able to do something about it is so small that the risk of a wipeout event is relatively high, given that we seem to go through periods of time where we just get decimated by.
I still think the chance per year of this is extremely low.
This
Partly because actually my friend helped with a book that went through all the different possible extinction events. So he had to like help research each thing like this. And I think like if you add up the ones that aren't sort of made by us recently, like if you add up all the like asteroids and supervolcanoes and stuff, it's like pretty tiny still, like the sum of all of them. Um, and so I don't know. I feel like saying like, oh yeah, let's destroy the world within the next 10 years or whatever, it's gonna happen anyway, is super I don't know, just seems very insincere. Or like I feel like if someone is saying that, they actually just aren't taking the situation seriously, or like don't actually think that they're going to destroy the world, probably. Or like,
Or they're
I don't know.
just miserable in their own life for some reason, perhaps.
Yeah. I feel like I don't know, even most miserable people, if if a thing which viscerally seems like it's going to kill them appears, I feel like they respond in a different way to that. Like,
I have not been able to track down this report, but I came across something that was an excerpt from a book that was talking about how during World War II, all of the mental institutions emptied because all of a sudden, the people who a week before were on the psych ward were now driving ambulances because
yeah,
whatever was eating them was gone. They were just like, "Oh my
mm,
God, I have to help." And so they were motivated and galvanized by this existential threat to act. And then as soon as the
yeah,
war ended, the hospitals filled up basically
yeah,
immediately. And
yeah,
so I think that this is what you're saying, where when there's like a real existential threat, people are motivated and galvanized towards it.
yeah.
And so if you
Right.
don't see the threat, it's hard to be galvanized towards it. So
Or it's like tempting to kind of just say all kinds of things like, yeah, humanity should die or whatever. Like, I think, I don't know, I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I think that humanity should die. I think you know, if their family was held hostage and about to be shot or something, I think they would respond in an extremely different way. And like, they're just not thinking through what it means for humanity to get killed or something. It's like somehow lands in a totally different register. Um, and I don't know, and it feels appropriate to be like flippant about it, or like think about it for 2 seconds and then say whatever comes to mind. Um,
There are certainly people who believe that and act accordingly too, which is really terrifying. right? You know, school shooters, stuff like that. I mean,
That's true. Yeah, I agree that some people actually, when faced viscerally with the idea of many people dying, are in favor of. But I think it's many fewer than the people who like around me are like, yeah, whatever. Well,
yeah, I think that's true. And hopefully those types of people, the former, don't end up at the heads of AI companies.
We should do a poll. All right, Katya, it's been fantastic to talk to you and to get these perspectives. Like I said at the beginning, this is really the first conversation that we've dealt with this head on, and I feel like you've given us a real background landscape to be able to operate from,
oh, good.
which I really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Welcome.
It's been mind expanding. I often leave these conversations, really good ones, with a very busy mind. Like I need to lie down in a dark room and sort of
Yeah.
deconvolve all of this. So thank you for giving that to me. And yeah, good luck. I hope you discover exactly how it is that we can control this future.
Where can people watch your progress towards that very noble goal?
um, this is my my AI related stuff is mostly on AIimpacts.org. It's my little organization. And broader thoughts about everything, including AI sometimes, are at worldspiritsockpuppet.com.
Very cool. So check it out, everybody. We'll put some links down below. And yeah, otherwise, good luck out there.
Thank you. You too.
In the quest for machines with compassion and vision. And I hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yes.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers
Thank you so
crossed.
much.
Thanks,
Good
Katja.
luck to your ongoing conversations about it.
Yes. Hopefully we'll get to the bottom of this eventually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Us and everyone else.
Mm.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
It was really fun to sit with you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Great.